I don't usually talk about my family much, not because we're private, but because every time I do, someone tries to one-up my misery with, "Oh, you think your family's bad? But I'm telling you, mine is the kind of toxic that doesn't scream in your face or throw dishes across the room. No, my family specializes in something worse: backhanded comments, passive-aggressive smirks, and the kind of manipulation you don't even realize is happening until you're halfway home and suddenly wondering why you feel like garbage." My name's Tyler, I'm 29, and I've spent most of my adult life trying to keep a healthy distance between me and the people who raised me. But as you'll see, sometimes, no matter how far you run, the past catches up, in a suit, with a fake smile, and holding a wine glass at Thanksgiving dinner. For context, I work in legal consulting, specifically with early-stage startups. I help them avoid lawsuits, or sometimes, I'm brought in after the damage has already been done. I keep things low-key. I don't brag, I don't bring my work into family gatherings, and most of the time, I don't even correct people when they assume I'm still working at that one law firm I interned with 6 years ago. Why? Because the second someone in my family thinks you're doing too well, you become a target. A punching bag. A story they get to rewrite to suit their version of events. Take my cousin Lila, for instance. She and I were inseparable when we were kids, built pillow forts together, made up dumb songs on road trips, shared everything. But once we hit our 20s and I started moving up while she seemed to stall out, something shifted. She got bitter, snippy. Every interaction started feeling like a test I didn't know I was taking. But still, I tried. I went to her birthdays, sent holiday cards, even helped her edit her resume once. That was my mistake, thinking effort would earn me goodwill. Last Thanksgiving, I was debating skipping the family dinner altogether. It had been a rough couple of months, long hours, a few tough cases, not a lot of sleep. But mom guilt tripped me in her usual way. "You never make time for family anymore," she said over the phone, her voice coated in that disappointed tone she's mastered over the years. Lila's bringing her new boyfriend. Everyone's excited to meet him. I should have known that was code for this is going to be a circus, and you're the unwitting main act. So I showed up, brought a bottle of wine. Nothing fancy, just enough to avoid questions. The dinner was at my aunt and uncle's house, like always. Big oak dining table, mismatched chairs, fake candles flickering even though the overhead lights were already blinding. Everyone was there. My mom, of course, Aunt Carol and Uncle Mark, who've always looked like they stepped out of a 90s family sitcom, but act like they're auditioning for a reality show called Petty and Proud. My younger brother Jake, who mostly stays quiet unless someone brings up cryptocurrency. And Lila, seated proudly next to a guy I'd never seen before, smiling like she just won the lottery. "This is Brandon," she announced as I walked in. "He founded this app that helps small businesses connect with investors. He's kind of a big deal." I smiled politely, nodded, shook his hand. He had the kind of grip that's more performance than connection, firm, but with no warmth behind it. He was dressed sharp, like he wanted to be mistaken for a CEO at all times. Navy blazer, expensive-looking watch, loafers with no socks. And from the second I sat down, I could feel it. He had something to prove. The first jab came before we even started eating. We were making small talk about cities we'd traveled to, and I mentioned a client trip I took to San Francisco. Brandon grinned across the table and said, "Oh, I love when lawyers pretend they're entrepreneurs. It's cute, just like that. No wink, no smile to soften it. Just a hit delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who's used to people laughing along." And they did. Aunt Carol let out this little snort. Uncle Mark chuckled. Even my mom gave this tight-lipped smile like, "He's not wrong, Tyler." I swallowed it. I've learned not to react. You react, you give them fuel. Later, while we passed around the mashed potatoes, Brandon started talking about his company. His tone had that smug tilt I've come to associate with guys who think being the loudest in the room means they're the smartest. "We're revolutionizing the small business space," he declared. "Nobody's doing what we're doing. We've already raised 2 rounds, and next year? Exit strategy." I nodded, stayed quiet. But I could feel Lila watching me, waiting for me to chime in. Almost like she wanted a fight. She never liked being second best at anything, and in her mind, this dinner was her victory lap. New boyfriend, successful startup, all eyes on her. Brandon kept going, name-dropping investors, throwing around buzzwords like disruptive and scalable, like he was pitching us instead of eating turkey. At one point, He looked at me directly and asked, "What about you, Tyler? You still doing whatever it is you do?" That got a laugh. A real one this time, from multiple people. My uncle even added, "Probably suing someone for calling him boring." That one stung more than I expected. It was such a dumb line, but the way everyone chuckled made it clear they all thought the same thing. They didn't take me seriously. Not really. I tried to laugh it off. Took a sip of wine, smiled, said, "Yeah, something like that." But inside, I could feel something knotting up in my chest. The kind of tension that starts as frustration but hardens into something colder when left unchecked. Brandon kept poking, little digs about lawyers being parasites, about how real innovation happens outside courtrooms, about how the only people who sue startups are the ones who couldn't build anything themselves. Every time he said something, I looked at Lila. She never flinched, never defended me. In fact, she seemed proud of him. Eventually, I spoke up. I said, "You know, I'm happy your company's doing well, Brandon. But not every lawsuit is a cash grab. Some of us try to hold people accountable when they cross lines." My tone wasn't angry. It wasn't even sharp, just firm. But the second I said it, my mom rolled her eyes. "Tyler," she muttered, "maybe if you weren't so sensitive all the time, people wouldn't joke so much." That did it. That opened the floodgates. Because it wasn't just Brandon. It was all of them. Years of tiny cuts, framed as jokes. 1,000 unspoken expectations, and the constant reminder that no matter what I did, I'd always be the one who took things too seriously. So I shut up. I bit my tongue. I went quiet. But then Brandon, grinning and unaware, started talking about a lawsuit he'd just received. Some clown filed this bogus complaint about IP infringement, he said, laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. Thinks we stole their pitch deck or something. Honestly, it's pathetic. We're not worried. My legal team's already shredding it. And in that moment, I felt something shift. Because I knew exactly what he was talking about. I was that clown. And suddenly, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I just smiled, leaned back in my chair, and said, "Huh, that's interesting. I don't usually talk shop at dinner, but I think I know that case. In fact, I think I'm the one who filed it." And that's when the laughing stopped. Brandon blinked first. It was just for a second, but I caught it, the way his smile faltered. The way his eyebrows twitched ever so slightly, like his brain was trying to reroute itself in real time. Everyone else froze too, but in different ways. Lila stopped mid-chew. My mom turned her head toward me, so slowly it felt like the room had dropped a few degrees. My uncle cleared his throat. The air was thick with something I couldn't name yet, but I could feel it humming under my skin. "You're kidding," Brandon said, still smiling, but now it was all teeth. "That's a joke, right?" I took another sip of wine, set my glass down, and shrugged. Nope. Nobody laughed this time. Brandon chuckled again, but it sounded forced now. "You're telling me you're behind that lawsuit? You what? Work for the firm representing them?" "No," I said, casually picking up a roll from the breadbasket. "I'm the one who filed it. I represent the plaintiff. My client came to me a few months ago with some pretty compelling documentation. Screenshots, emails, even timestamps from a shared pitch drive." I tore the roll in half slowly, my voice even calm. "They're claiming your company stole their concept, altered it slightly, and used it in your most recent investor deck." For a moment, it felt like nobody was breathing. Then my aunt laughed. It was sharp, uncomfortable. "Oh, come on, Tyler. It's Thanksgiving. Can we not talk about lawsuits?" And he said she said garbage? I ignored her. I wasn't talking to her. My eyes stayed locked on Brandon. "You remember the name Daniel Keener?" He stiffened. Just a little. Just enough for me to know I'd hit the nerve. "Wait, what is this?" Lila finally spoke, looking from me to Brandon and back again. "You're suing his company? Like, in real life?" Brandon recovered quickly. "It's ridiculous," he said, waving a hand. "Some guy thinks he had the same idea we did, and now he's crying foul because we executed better. Happens all the time in tech. Doesn't mean it's valid. Tyler's just the legal guy cashing in." That stung, but I let it slide. I've dealt with worse in courtrooms. "You signed an NDA when you took that meeting," I said. "Your company did anyway. That's a binding document." Brandon scoffed. "It's vague. It's not enforceable." My smile never left. "That's what we'll find out in court." And just like that, the power shifted. He knew it. I knew it. But everyone else? They were still trying to catch up. My mom broke the silence first. "Tyler, Why would you bring this up here? What kind of person comes to a family gathering and throws a lawsuit at the dinner table? I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, I didn't flinch under her disappointment. The kind of person who's been sitting here all night while everyone laughed at him. The kind of person who's been called sensitive for asking not to be mocked. The kind of person who's been doing his job and then finds out the guy insulting him over turkey is the same guy trying to bury evidence in a legal case. She blinked. Once. But I wasn't done. You raised me to work hard, to follow the rules, to stand up when something's wrong. But when I actually do that, suddenly I'm too much? You're okay with people tearing me down as long as they smile when they do it. Nobody said a word. I stood up, slowly, letting my napkin fall onto the plate. You want to know the worst part? I said, voice steady. I wasn't even going to bring it up. I didn't come here to rub anything in. I came because you asked. Because you said family matters. But now I'm sitting here realizing, maybe it only matters when I'm small enough to be stepped on. I turned to leave. Tyler, wait. My mom started, but I held up a hand. I'm done waiting. I walked out, coat over my shoulder, heart pounding, not from nerves, but from something colder. Resolved. I didn't slam the door behind me, didn't yell. I just left. But that wasn't the end. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I'd even had coffee. First it was a text from my mom. We need to talk. Then another from my brother Jake. Brandon's freaking out. Says you blindsided him. What's going on? Then Lila, of course. You seriously just ruined Thanksgiving for everyone. Hope it was worth it. I didn't reply. I sat with it. Let the silence grow. Because that was the breaking point, really. Not the lawsuit, not the jabs, not even the moment at dinner when I pulled the pin. The breaking point was realizing that no matter what I did, how much I achieved, how quiet I stayed, how many dinners I attended, I was never going to be seen as enough. Not unless I shrunk myself. Not unless I let people like Brandon talk over me while everyone else laughed along. That afternoon, I got a call from my firm's lead partner. Apparently, Brandon had tried to reach out through unofficial channels. Wanted to settle things personally. I told him to run it by my client. If they were open to negotiation, we'd go through the proper legal steps. No shortcuts. No favors. That's when it really hit me. He thought because we'd shared a dinner table, I'd back down. That I'd just fold up the case and pretend nothing happened. But he didn't know me. Not really. He only knew the version of me Lila probably painted for him. Quiet, awkward, the cousin who'd gotten lucky with a law degree but never really fit in with the family. The rest of the week was a blur of emails, texts, and passive-aggressive voicemails. Aunt Carol called to say I'd embarrassed Lila. Uncle Mark suggested I just let it go because what's family if not forgiveness? Even my mom tried to play mediator, saying, maybe there's a way you can work this out without making it so public. Public. That word kept echoing in my head. Because that's what they were really worried about, wasn't it? Not the truth. Not whether Brandon had actually stolen anything. They were worried people might see. See that their Golden Girls boyfriend wasn't as bulletproof as he seemed. See that maybe I wasn't the doormat they thought they could roll over. But the worst part, the part that stuck with me, that played on a loop in my head, was a message Lila sent 2 days later. You always had a problem with me getting more attention. You couldn't just let me have something good for once. You had to ruin it. That one hurt. Because for all our differences, I'd never wanted to ruin anything for her. I remembered every childhood sleepover, every dumb secret we'd sworn to keep. I remembered when she cried over not getting into her dream school, and I stayed up late helping her brainstorm alternatives. I remembered when she broke her wrist falling off a bike and begged me not to tell anyone she'd been trying to impress a boy, so I didn't. I remembered when she called me in the middle of the night because she was scared of failing her business class. And I remembered that I always showed up. But in her mind, I was the villain now. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I wouldn't stay quiet. Because I wouldn't play the part they'd assigned me. And so the silence stretched. I didn't go to Sunday dinner. Didn't respond to the group chat when Aunt Carol sent pictures of her cat in a pilgrim hat. Didn't even acknowledge the Merry Christmas text that came a month later. I was done performing. But the thing is, the story didn't end there. Because while my family tried to paint me as the problem, Brandon's company started to bleed. The legal proceedings got messy. Evidence surfaced. Emails, timestamps, investor pitches that looked eerily similar to Daniel's original proposal. Suddenly, that bogus lawsuit wasn't so easy to dismiss. And Brandon Brandon started to unravel. But that part, that's where it gets interesting. And trust me, nobody was laughing anymore. For weeks after Thanksgiving, everything felt like static. I went through the motions, woke up, went to work, answered emails, filed motions, prepped briefs. But inside, I was on autopilot. I'd been through rough patches before. Law school was brutal. My first job out of school had nearly broken me. And there were nights early in my career when I lay on the floor of my studio apartment, just staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever feel like I belonged in the world I'd worked so hard to get into. But this was something different. Because this wasn't about work. It wasn't about money or failure or imposter syndrome. This was about my family. The people who were supposed to back me even when I stumbled. And for the first time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost something permanent. Something that wasn't coming back. I didn't get invited to the annual post-holiday brunch Aunt Carol through every January. No group selfies. No inside jokes about who spiked the orange juice too much this year. The family group chat quieted down around me, except for the occasional passive-aggressive "hope everyone is doing well." That clearly wasn't meant for me. Even Jake, my brother, the one person I thought might have my back, stopped reaching out after I didn't respond to his third "you okay?" text. Rock bottom didn't come with a dramatic breakdown. It came with silence. An emptiness that followed me everywhere. I sat at home on weekends with the TV, playing shows I wasn't watching. I walked past my phone on the kitchen counter and didn't bother checking it. I stopped going to the gym. Stopped cooking for myself. Just takeout containers and deadlines and the same gray hoodie every day. And yet, somewhere in that silence, something shifted. It happened gradually. At first, I didn't even realize it. It started with a call from my client, Daniel, the guy who'd come to me months ago with that pitch deck and a desperate need for someone to believe him. He was a scrappy guy, early 30s, not a lot of connections. His startup idea wasn't flashy, but it was smart, efficient. And the more I'd looked into it, the more I'd realized just how bold Brandon's theft really was. "Hey," Daniel had said during one of our late-night calls. "I just wanted to say thanks again." Most people would have laughed me out of the room. I remembered staring at my laptop in the dark, not sure what to say. I hadn't told Daniel about the Thanksgiving mess. He didn't know the guy we were going after had insulted me in front of my whole family over sweet potato casserole. All he knew was that I was the lawyer who hadn't let him get steamrolled. "You gave me a shot," he said. "That means everything." That stuck with me. A few days later, I found myself rereading Daniel's original pitch deck. Not because I needed to, it was already etched into my memory, but because I wanted to remember what had pulled me into this fight in the first place. And as I flipped through the slides, something clicked. This case. This wasn't about Brandon. It wasn't even about Lila or my mom or anyone else sitting around that table that night. It was about truth. About standing for something when everyone else just wanted to laugh it off. So I got back to work. I started showing up at the office early. Stayed late. Dug deeper. I stopped thinking like someone on the defensive and started thinking like someone building something. Every motion I filed, every piece of evidence I cataloged, it was all part of a bigger picture now. A case that could make waves, not just for Daniel, but for every underdog who ever had their ideas stolen by a slick-talking fraud and loafers with no socks. At the same time, I started slowly pulling myself out of the rut I'd sunk into. I forced myself back into the gym, even if it was just 20 minutes on the treadmill. I cooked one meal from scratch a week. Then two. I deleted the group chat and muted Lila's social media. Not out of spite, just peace. I started reading again. Not legal briefs, books, stories, ideas. I even picked up a used guitar from a shop down the street. I'd always wanted to learn, and suddenly, there were no more excuses. And the weirdest thing? The quieter my life got, the better it felt. No more fake smiles. No more trying to keep the peace at my own expense. Just me, finally listening to myself. Meanwhile, the case heated up. Brandon's legal team was flailing. Every time they tried to discredit Daniel's timeline, we dropped a new bomb, metadata, emails, even a text where Brandon had accidentally forwarded part of Daniel's original pitch deck to one of his advisors. The arrogance was astonishing. I wasn't surprised when news of the lawsuit started leaking into the tech press. A few blogs ran headlines like, "Rising startup facing IP infringement lawsuit," and "Is this founder too good to be true?" Nothing major. Yet, but murmurs were growing. Then came the deposition. Brandon walked into the room like he was still on a stage. Hair gelled, watch polished, suit too tight. But underneath the swagger, I could see it, the cracks forming. He didn't expect to be grilled. He didn't expect me to be the one asking the questions. I kept my tone calm, professional, but every question was a needle, threading its way through the web he'd spun. And when I presented the slide, Daniel's original slide, that had been copied almost word for word in Brandon's investor deck, he stammered. I didn't make that slide. No, I said, tapping my pen. Your CTO did, using files from a shared drive. The same drive your company accessed after signing an NDA with Daniel Keener. You know what that's called, Brandon? He didn't answer. Infringement. He looked at his lawyer. His lawyer looked down. And I knew we had him. After the deposition, things moved fast. Daniel started getting calls from investors who'd originally ghosted him. We always liked the idea, they said. Just didn't know if it had legs. Now they did. Now they saw what had really happened. And suddenly, Daniel wasn't the underdog anymore. He was the guy who'd stood his ground and won. One of those investors reached out to me, said he liked how I handled myself, asked if I'd ever considered consulting full-time for venture funds, helping them vet the companies they invested in. I said I'd think about it. I started sleeping better, eating better, laughing again. And the best part? I no longer needed anyone's approval to do it. Because I'd found something stronger than validation. I'd found clarity. Clarity that I didn't know anyone's silence just because they shared my blood. Clarity that doing the right thing isn't always clean or comfortable or applauded. Clarity that sometimes, when the world around you is built on paper-thin lies and plastic smiles, being the person who tells the truth is the most radical thing you can do. And still, despite everything, part of me wondered if I'd hear from Lila. Weeks passed. Nothing. Until one night, as I was locking up the office late, I saw her name flash across my phone screen. She was calling, and I hadn't heard her voice since Thanksgiving. I stood there staring at the screen, just watching it ring. I didn't pick up, because I knew, whatever she had to say now, it wasn't going to fix anything. But I also knew something else. This wasn't the end. Not even close. Because the fallout was just beginning. And Brandon? Brandon had no idea what was coming next. The message from Lila sat in my inbox for 5 days before I opened it. Not because I was angry, I had moved past that, but because I wasn't curious anymore. There was no part of me that needed her validation, or her excuses, or even her apology. But eventually, I clicked. It was short. Cold. You blindsided me. I don't know if we can come back from this. Brandon says this is all about you being jealous and bitter. I'm trying to believe that's not true. But right now, I don't know. That was all. No, how are you? No recognition that Brandon's company was actively trying to bury a theft that could ruin someone else's life. Just you made this awkward for me. Classic Lila. And with that, something settled into place. A clarity I hadn't realized I'd been waiting for. I wasn't just going to win this lawsuit anymore. I was going to bury the narrative they'd all been spinning for years. The one where I was the odd one out, the too sensitive cousin, the one who didn't know how to have a sense of humor. I was going to pull the mask off Brandon's smug little startup and expose everything they'd stolen, everything they lied about to investors, partners, even the media. And I wasn't going to do it for revenge. I was going to do it because it was right. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel a little personal. Because now I had something Brandon didn't. I had receipts. The first thing I did was dig deeper. We already had a strong case with the email chains and the metadata. Brandon's team had been sloppy, and we'd caught them red-handed lifting core slides from Daniel's deck. But I wanted more. I wanted to know just how far the rot went. So I started poking around. I had a contact, Jules, someone I'd worked with during a consulting gig the year before. She used to be on the due diligence team for a mid-sized VC fund. Smart, discreet, and with access to all kinds of private investor networks. When I explained the situation, she didn't hesitate. "Oh, that company," she said with a dry laugh. "Yeah, they've been making waves in all the worst ways. Couple of us have been wondering how long it would take before someone called them out." Jules gave me access to an internal investor forum where anonymous chatter about shady deals and questionable startups was the norm. And sure enough, buried in a thread from 2 months ago was a gem. Heard from someone inside LaunchBridge that Brando Tech fudged their monthly active users last quarter. Inflated numbers to close Series B, NDA'd the analyst who caught it. LaunchBridge was one of Brandon's early investors. And if there was even a whisper of number fudging on a funding round, that was a bomb waiting to go off. I flagged it. Next, I started compiling everything public. Interviews Brandon had given, blog posts his company published, a podcast episode where he described how he'd come up with the idea in the shower after a particularly intense run. Funny, considering Daniel had timestamps on his Google Drive from nearly 6 months before that. Every quote, every soundbite, every puffed-up PR post became another brick in the wall I was building. Then came the biggest surprise. Daniel called me one morning and said, "Hey, I just got a weird message on LinkedIn. Some guy who used to work at Brando Tech. Says he's got documents. Is it real?" I asked. "Seems like it. He says he left on bad terms, but he saw what they did to me and doesn't think it's right." His name was Marcus, former junior product manager, and he had an entire email chain where Brandon and his CTO discussed reworking Daniel's slides to fit the new narrative. Not only that, there were internal memos where Brandon bragged about how nobody will come after us. The kid doesn't have the money for a lawyer. I read that line 4 times. The kid doesn't have the money. Brandon thought this was just another easy theft, that he could steal, scale, and skip town before anyone noticed. What he didn't count on was the kid finding someone who knew exactly how to play the long game. Now I had evidence. Now I had motive. Now I needed an opportunity. The legal case was proceeding exactly as expected. Brandon's lawyers were doing their best to stall, delay, deny, but momentum was shifting. Every discovery motion we filed uncovered something new. And yet, as airtight as the case was becoming, I knew the courtroom wouldn't be enough. Because even if we won, even if the court awarded Daniel damages, Brandon would still be able to spin it. He'd blame a disgruntled former employee. He'd call it a misunderstanding. He'd settle, disappear for 6 months, and rebrand under a new name. Unless we went public. But I couldn't leak anything while discovery was ongoing. It could jeopardize the case. So instead, I focused on building a shadow dossier. A separate, non-legal version of everything we knew. The story, the timeline, the fraud, the stolen idea, the arrogance, all of it. I shared it with Daniel. "What is this?" he asked. "It's your future profile piece," I said. "For when this is over. When you're the guy who took on a dirty startup and won." He laughed, nervously. "You think anyone will care?" "They'll care," I said. "Trust me, because I'd seen this before. The tech world loves underdogs, especially ones who punch up and win." And Brandon? He was practically begging for a fall from grace. I looped Jules in again. She helped me quietly circulate pieces of the dossier through trusted channels, just enough to get people talking. No leaks, just whispers, just questions. Did Brando Tech steal their core product? Why did Launchbridge back out of their Series C? Is Brandon really who he says he is? The pressure started to mount, and while all of that was happening, I prepared the final piece. The conference. Tech West was the biggest startup conference on the West Coast. Thousands of investors, founders, journalists, and consultants, all under one roof. Brandon had been invited to speak on a panel titled "Scaling with Integrity: How to Lead in the Modern Era." The irony wasn't lost on me. I reached out to the organizers through a contact of mine and secured a last-minute guest speaker slot for Daniel in a smaller, but still heavily attended, startup founder session. Nothing flashy, just a 10-minute talk on ethical funding and IP protection. But it would be enough. Enough to plant the story. Enough to let people see him. And when they did, when they started connecting the dots between Daniel's story and the lawsuit headlines and the sudden retreat of Brando Tech's funding, the truth would hit like a hammer. The final move came 1 week before the conference. Brandon's company issued a quiet press release announcing strategic restructuring and refocusing product development. It was corporate speak for panic mode. A few investors started pulling out. Their CTO abruptly stepped down. The writing was on the wall, but Brandon still didn't see it. Still thought he could bluff his way through. I got a call that same night, from my mother, of all people. "I heard you're still going after Brandon," she said, voice tight. "Do you really think this is the best way to handle things?" I paused. "Yes, I do. You've made things really hard for Lila. People are talking. She's humiliated." "Lila chose to humiliate herself," I said calmly, "by standing next to someone who steals and lies and treats everyone else like they're beneath him. That's not on me." Silence. Then, quietly, "I don't recognize you anymore." I smiled to myself. "Good," I said. "That means I'm finally doing something right." And so the stage was set. Brandon would walk onto that conference panel in a tailored suit and flash his best smile. Daniel would quietly tell his story 2 rooms away. And by the time the weekend was over, everyone would know. The theft, the arrogance, the lies. This wasn't just about a lawsuit anymore. This was about legacy, and I was going to make sure the truth had the final word. The first day of Tech West arrived like the slow, steady inhale before a punch. The city buzzed with rented Teslas, clacking badge lanyards, and overpriced cold brew. A sea of aspiring founders and freshly minted VCs flooded the downtown convention center, all elbowing their way toward whatever disruption smelled most like the next unicorn. I'd been to Tech West twice before, but this year felt different. This year, I wasn't just another suit in the crowd. I was the guy holding the match. Brandon's panel was set for Saturday afternoon, Scaling with Integrity. That title still made me laugh. Hosted on the main stage, it was prime real estate. Dozens of cameras, tech bloggers in the front row, all the big names in venture peeking in from the back. Brandon was billed as the headliner. His headshot, smiling, jawline clenched, hand on chin like he'd just invented clean water, was plastered across the promo banners like he was the second coming of Jobs. Daniel's slot came 2 hours before, in room B12. Smaller, quieter. No stage lights. No camera crew. Just a low podium, some plastic chairs, and a crowd of maybe 60 early-stage founders there to learn about avoiding legal traps. He almost didn't show. "I don't know if I can do this," he told me that morning. We were seated on a bench outside the venue, both of us sipping lukewarm coffee in silence. "You don't have to give a TED Talk," I said. "You just have to tell the truth. The rest will take care of itself." He nodded. "Then, he's going to be in the same building as me." That's so insane. I looked at him. And by tonight, he's going to wish he wasn't. Daniel's talk started quietly. A few people trickled in, then a few more. By minute 10, the room was full. He didn't start with drama. No theatrics. Just a steady voice and a story. I came up with a platform to help small businesses connect with micro-investors. I pitched it. I got a few meetings. One of them was with Brando Tech. He didn't use Brandon's name directly, which was smart. But the room was already buzzing. They signed an NDA. We shared documents. They passed. Pause. A few months later, I saw my deck, with a new logo, being presented at a startup showcase. Word for word. Slide for slide. The audience was silent now. No laptops open. No side conversations. Just eyes locked forward. I thought about walking away. But someone said to me, "Theft doesn't become innovation just because the thief gets venture funding." That someone had been me. He didn't say that part. He didn't need to. He ended the talk with one line. "Don't let fear of being difficult keep you from being right." The applause started slow, then rolled into a standing ovation. And right there, in that plain conference room with cheap carpet and humming fluorescent lights, I knew we'd won the crowd. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. Brandon walked onto the main stage 2 hours later like he was still king. Flanked by 2 other CEOs and a moderator who clearly worshipped the ground he walked on, he launched straight into his usual monologue. "At Brando Tech, we believe in integrity, innovation, and scaling with purpose." The irony nearly made me choke. I was standing in the back, blending into the crowd, just another nameless attendee. But I wasn't alone. Jules was there too. Daniel sat beside her, hood up, eyes sharp. We weren't here to heckle. We didn't need to. Because the real revenge was already in motion. 2 hours before Brandon's panel, I had quietly uploaded our legal filing to a public case database, something anyone could access with the right link. Then, Jules had sent that link, along with our meticulously curated dossier of quotes, timestamps, slide comparisons, and email chains, to 3 specific people. A mid-tier tech blogger known for exposés. A well-respected VC journalist covering startup accountability. A rising tech influencer on TikTok with 500,000 followers and a love for drama. The story exploded. It started as a whisper in the back rows during Brandon's talk, phones buzzing, screens lighting up with alerts. Then came the murmurs. People checking the article, scrolling, whispering to each other. By the time Brandon was answering his 3rd softball question about what makes a founder trustworthy, the first journalist had tweeted, "Police Scarlight developing. Lawsuit reveals Brando Tech may have stolen core IP from a smaller startup after signing NDA. Founder Brandon Price named directly. Full story dropping in 10. The moderator blinked. looked down at his phone, then back up. One of the panelists shifted uncomfortably. Brandon kept talking, but he could feel it. The silence in the room wasn't admiration, it was tension. The polite, sharp-edged kind that came when everyone knew something you didn't. Then came the TikTok. Just under 2 minutes. Side-by-side comparison of Daniel's deck and Brandon's. Circling text. Zooming in on the email thread where Brandon wrote, "The kid doesn't have the money to do anything." It was already at 20K likes by the time the panel ended. Brandon stepped off stage to a swarm of cameras. But this time, no one was asking about his roadmap. They were asking about the lawsuit, about the emails, about the stolen pitch. He tried to laugh it off. Said, "It's all a misunderstanding. We're confident in our position." But his voice cracked. I watched from across the lobby as he grabbed Lila's arm, pulling her aside, face twisted in panic. Her mouth was a tight line, arms crossed. She was already checking her phone, reading what the world now knew. She didn't look like someone defending her boyfriend. She looked like someone realizing she had backed the wrong horse. Within 48 hours, the fallout began. Brando Tech's LinkedIn page went dark. LaunchBridge issued a statement that they were pausing all support, pending investigation. 2 of their advisors resigned. Then came the emails from reporters. The ones I wanted. A long-form piece went live a week later. David versus Goliath. How a scrappy startup took on a Silicon Valley darling and won. It didn't name me directly. I was fine with that. But Daniel's story became a symbol of standing your ground. Within a month, Daniel closed a new round of funding. Clean money. Real investors. He renamed the company. He moved into a proper office. And he asked me to be his permanent legal advisor. I said yes. Brandon, on the other hand, disappeared from social media. The last thing anyone heard, he was being pushed out by what remained of his board. The startup world moved on without him, like it always does. One day, he was a visionary. The next, just another cautionary tale. As for Lila, she sent me another message. This one was different. I didn't know the full story. I was wrong. I should have listened. I'm sorry. I didn't reply. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need to anymore. The silence wasn't bitter now, it was peace. Months later, I stood in Daniel's new office, watching a fresh team of developers work around whiteboards and screens. "You still thinking about the trial?" he asked me. I shook my head. "No, I'm thinking about how many times I almost didn't show up." He looked over. "Glad you did." So was I? Because in the end, revenge wasn't the court ruling or the headlines. It was becoming the kind of man who didn't flinch anymore, who knew his worth, who didn't shrink to make others comfortable. The man they underestimated, again and again, until he burned the mask they made for him, and never looked back. I didn't just win the case. I buried the lie. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to hold a grudge. I used to believe that family always had each other's backs, no matter what. That's what I was raised to think. But when I needed them the most, my so-called family turned their backs on me without a second thought. It all started 3 years ago when my life fell apart overnight. One moment, I was healthy, working a stable job, and planning my future. The next, I was lying in a hospital bed, staring at medical bills that I had no way of paying. The doctors told me I needed urgent treatment, and without insurance, I was drowning in debt before I could even process what was happening. But I wasn't alone, right? I had family. My relatives were well off. Some were even wealthy. My uncle ran a successful business. My cousin bragged about her multiple investment properties. And my parents, well, let's just say they were never shy about reminding me how comfortable they were in retirement. So, I swallowed my pride and reached out. I wasn't asking for charity. I made it clear. I just needed a loan, something to help me stay afloat until I recovered and got back on my feet. I even offered to sign an agreement, pay interest, whatever it took. I thought they'd understand. I thought they'd care. But instead, they gave me the same response over and over. "We have our own lives to deal with." Some of them ignored me completely. Others sent vague, dismissive texts. And a few had the audacity to lecture me about financial responsibility before telling me they just couldn't afford to throw money away. Throw money away. These were the same people who posted pictures of their expensive vacations, their designer shopping sprees, their new cars and remodeled homes. And yet, when I was struggling just to afford basic treatment, they acted like I was a burden. I was devastated. But more than that, I was angry. Still, I managed. I did what I had to do. I picked up extra work when I was physically able. I fought with the hospital over bills, and I got through it without them. It wasn't easy, but I survived. And over time, that anger I felt toward them, it didn't fade. It sharpened. It had been over 2 years since my so-called family turned their backs on me. By then, I had rebuilt my life on my own. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I went to bed hungry, days when I thought I wouldn't make it. But I kept pushing forward. I worked relentlessly, taking any job that would help me stay afloat. I taught myself new skills, found remote work, and slowly climbed my way out of the financial pit I had been left in. Every dollar I made felt like a victory, a reminder that I had survived despite them. And then, one day, I got a message that IT was from my cousin, one of the first people I had reached out to when I was desperate. The same cousin who had sent me a 2-sentence text telling me that times are tough for everyone while posting pictures of her luxury vacation in Greece. I stared at her name on my phone, feeling something bitter rise in my throat. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened the message. "Hey, it's been forever. Hope you're doing well. Listen, I really need a favor, and I know you're great with finances. Can we talk?" I almost laughed out loud. A favor? From me? After all this time? I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I let the message sit there while I leaned back in my chair, thinking that a tea first. I figured it was some minor inconvenience. Maybe she needed help budgeting for her next shopping spree. But something about her tone seemed off. There was a nervousness in it, a hesitation that she wasn't usually the type to have. I decided to do a little digging. A quick search on social media told me everything I needed to know. My cousin had made some bad investments. She had stretched herself thin, buying properties she couldn't afford, and now that the market had taken a downturn, she was bleeding money. That was satisfying enough on its own. But then I saw something else. My uncle, the one who had built a wildly successful business, the one who had given me a condescending speech about standing on my own 2 feet, had filed for bankruptcy. That I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling a cold, creeping sense of amusement settle over me. It was all falling apart for them. The same people who had refused to lift a finger when I was drowning were now struggling to stay afloat themselves. And they had the nerve to ask me for help. I didn't respond to my cousin right away. Instead, I waited. I wanted to see just how desperate they were willing to get. 2 days later, my phone rang. IT was my uncle. The man who had ignored my calls when I was begging for help was now calling me. I let it ring for a while before finally answering, keeping my voice neutral. "Hey, Uncle. It's been a while." There was a long pause on the other end, like he was struggling to find the right words. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Yeah, it has. Listen, I won't waste your time. We're in a bit of a tough spot right now, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to help out." I almost wanted to drag it out, to play dumb, to make him say it. But I already knew what he wanted. "Help out how?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He hesitated. "Well, you've always been smart with money, and I know you've been doing well for yourself. We just need a little support to get back on our feet." We. The same we that had left me to suffer alone. I leaned back in my chair, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my chest. This was it. This was the moment I had dreamed about for years, and I wasn't about to waste it. "Oh, I'd love to help," I said, letting just a hint of amusement creep into my voice. "But, I have my own life to deal with." Silence. Pure, beautiful silence. I could hear him processing my words, could almost feel the moment he realized I was throwing his own excuse back in his face. But I wasn't done yet. Besides, I continued, I wouldn't want to throw money away. I could hear his breath hitch. That was exactly what he had told me years ago when I was desperate for help. He stammered for a moment, trying to recover. "Look, I know things were rough before, but this is different. We're family." "Oh, now we're family?" I interrupted, my voice turning cold. "Funny. I don't remember feeling like part of a family when I was in the hospital, wondering how I was going to survive." Another pause. Then, finally, he muttered, "I see how it is." I smiled to myself. "Yeah, I guess you do." And with that, I hung up. But this wasn't over yet, because the begging was only just beginning. Hanging up that call felt like winning a battle I had been fighting for years. But I knew it wasn't over. No, this was just the beginning. Because when people like my family fall, they don't go down quietly. They scramble, they claw, they beg, but only when they realize they have no other options. And suddenly, I was their only option. See, what my uncle said was true. I was doing well for myself, better than well. I had spent the last 2 years grinding, working harder than I ever had in my life. After clawing my way out of medical debt, I made a promise to myself. I would never be that vulnerable again. I became obsessed with learning everything I could about money, investments, passive income, building a business. I threw myself into it like my life depended on it. And in a way, it did. At IT wasn't easy. I sacrificed sleep, relationships, and any semblance of a social life. While my so-called family was still flaunting their lifestyles on social media, I was studying late into the night, working every side hustle I could find. And then, one day, it all paid off. I cracked the code. I started a business. One that took off faster than I could have imagined. The same skills I had begged my family to teach me, I taught myself, and the money started coming in. Slowly at first, but then it snowballed. Soon, I wasn't just financially stable. I was wealthy, and my family, they noticed. They noticed when I stopped struggling, when I started traveling, when I moved into a nicer place, upgraded my car, and, oh, the irony, when I started posting pictures of my success. At first, they watched from a distance. I could feel their curiosity through their awkward likes and half-hearted comments. But then, one by one, they started reaching out. It started subtly, casual messages, pretending to check in after years of silence. My parents sent a "hope you're doing well" text out of nowhere. My cousin, the one who had once dismissed me with a vague excuse, suddenly wanted to reconnect, and then, when their financial troubles started catching up to them, the messages got desperate. They weren't just checking in anymore. They needed something. And for the first time, they realized I had something they wanted. That's why my uncle called me. That's why my cousin had messaged me out of nowhere. They had spent their entire lives looking down on me, treating me like I was disposable. But now, I had something they couldn't ignore, and they thought I was going to save them. But they had no idea just how much I had changed. I wasn't the same person who had begged them for help all those years ago. I wasn't the desperate, struggling relative they could ignore. Now, I was the one with the power. And I was about to make damn sure they felt it. Because the next time they called me, I had plans for how that conversation was going to go. When the phone rang again, I wasn't surprised. This time, it was my mother. Now, let me be clear. My parents weren't destitute. They weren't on the streets. They weren't in any real danger. But for the first time in their lives, they were feeling the kind of financial stress that I had begged them to help me with years ago. And suddenly, all those times they told me, "We have our own lives to deal with," didn't seem to apply anymore. I let the phone ring. Once, twice, 3 times, then I picked up. "Hello?" I said, my voice calm, controlled. There was a pause. Then, my mother's voice, overly sweet, too sweet. "Sweetheart, it's been so long. How are you?" She sounded like a stranger, like a woman who had never once let me struggle alone. Even though I knew for a fact that's exactly what she had done, I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, just long enough for it to become uncomfortable. Then I said, "What do you want?" I could hear her falter. That wasn't the response she had been expecting. "Oh, honey, I just wanted to check in. See how my successful son is doing. I saw your pictures. You look great, really. We're all so proud of you." I almost laughed. Proud? Proud. Where was this pride when I was drowning in medical bills? Where was this concern when I needed them the most? But I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of knowing I cared. "I'm doing well," I said simply. "But you didn't call just to say that. What's going on?" Another pause, and then her voice softened, became more fragile. "Well, things have been difficult lately. You know how the economy is. Your father's investments took a hit, and, well, you know how expensive things are these days. It's been a little tight." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "So?" There was a sharp inhale, like she couldn't believe I was making her spell it out. "Well, I just thought maybe you could help us a little. There it was, the moment I had been waiting for. The same people who had turned their backs on me when I was at my lowest were now coming to me with their hands out, expecting me to fix their problems. I could have given them the money. Easily, I could have bailed them out with a single wire transfer. And that's exactly what they were banking on, that I would be too kind, too soft, too guilty to turn them away. But they had no idea how much I had changed, so I smiled, and I said, "No." Silence. Then, my mother let out a nervous laugh, like she thought she had misheard me. "Honey, what do you mean no?" I leaned forward, gripping the phone a little tighter. "I mean no, Mom. I'm not helping you." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. But we're family." That almost made me snap. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "Oh, now we're family?" I said, my voice quiet but sharp. Where was that attitude when I needed help? When I was drowning in medical debt, and you all acted like I didn't exist? "That was different," she protested. "We were busy. We had your own lives to deal with." I finished for her. There was nothing but silence, and for the first time in my life, I realized something. They didn't regret what they did. They weren't sorry. They just hated that the roles had reversed, that I now held the power, and I wasn't going to let them use me. So I took a deep breath and said, "I learned a lot when I was struggling, Mom. I learned who I could count on and who I couldn't." Then, before she could say another word, I hung up, and as I put the phone down, I realized something else. I didn't feel guilty, not even a little, because for the first time in my life, I was truly free. But little did I know, my family wasn't done yet. They weren't going to take no for an answer, and what they did next would prove just how desperate they really were. I should have expected it. I should have known that a simple no wasn't going to be enough for people like them. Because when entitled people lose control, they don't accept it. They don't take the loss with dignity. No, they try harder. And that's exactly what my family did. It started with messages. At first, they came from my mother. "Mom, I don't understand why you're being like this. We're family. Families support each other. Mom, this isn't fair. We helped raise you. You wouldn't be where you are without us. Mom, just think about it, okay? Don't let resentment cloud your heart." I ignored them, every single one. Then my uncle joined in. "Uncle, heard you're too good for your own family now? Uncle, money changes people. Just don't forget where you came from." That one made me laugh. Where I came from? The struggle I had to go through? They had the nerve to act like they had any part in my success when they had left me to rot. I didn't even bother responding. And then the messages changed. They weren't polite anymore. Mom texted, "I can't believe you're this selfish. We're struggling and you just sit there doing nothing?" Then she texted again, "You're rich now. It's just money. You wouldn't even miss it." Cousin texted, "Wow, really? After everything? You're disgusting." I could feel their anger through the screen, their desperation leaking into their words. And then came the guilt trip messages from Mom. "Your father isn't well. The stress is affecting his health. I hope you can live with yourself when something happens to him." That one made me pause. Not because I believed her. No, I knew my father. He was fine. But the fact that she would go that far to manipulate me, it was pathetic. And it told me one thing. They weren't just struggling. They were sinking. But nothing prepared me for what came next. Because they stopped with the messages. And they started showing up. It happened on a quiet afternoon. I had just come back from a meeting, feeling good about how things were going. Business was thriving. I had some major deals in the works, and for the first time in years, I felt completely in control of my life. Then the doorbell rang. I checked the security camera on my phone, and there they were. My mother, my father, and my uncle, standing outside my home. They had never been here before. They had never even asked where I lived. But here they were, on my doorstep. I let out a slow breath, staring at the screen. I could see it in their faces, the forced smiles, the tension in their eyes. They weren't here to talk. They were here to corner me, and I wasn't going to let it happen. So I did what they never expected. I ignored them. I watched as my mother rang the bell again, then knocked, then started calling my name. I watched as my father crossed his arms, clearly irritated. I watched as my uncle pulled out his phone, probably to call me. Another call I wouldn't answer, and then I turned off the camera, and I let them stand there. Because if they had taught me anything, it was that sometimes the best response is silence. But they weren't done, and no, not yet. Because the next thing they did would prove just how far they were willing to go. I let them wait 0.5 minutes, then 10, then 15. I wondered how long they'd last before they gave up. Before they realized that the son, the nephew, the relative they had tossed aside like trash wasn't going to roll over just because they finally needed something from him. But they didn't leave. Instead, my mother pounded on the door harder. "We know you're in there," she shouted. "Stop being childish and come talk to your family." I clenched my jaw.my family. That word meant nothing coming from them. But you know what? Fine, if they wanted to talk so badly. If they wanted their big moment, then I'd give it to them. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and stepped outside. The second I opened the door, my mother's face twisted into a look of exaggerated relief, like she hadn't been just moments away from screaming. "Finally," she huffed. "Why were you ignoring us?" I folded my arms. "Because I don't owe you anything. And I figured if I ignored you long enough, you'd get the message and leave." Her mouth fell open slightly, as if she couldn't believe I was actually saying it. My father scoffed. "What kind of way is that to talk to your parents?" I turned my gaze on him. "The same way you talked to me when I begged for help, and you said you had your own life to deal with." That shut him up. Why Uncle stepped in then, clearing his throat, clearly trying to smooth things over. "Look, kid, we know things were rough before, but what's done is done. Right now, we're in a difficult situation and you think I care?" I cut him off, raising an eyebrow. He blinked at me. "You think you can show up here," I continued, voice calm but sharp, "after turning your backs on me when I was desperate, when I was suffering, and expect me to just open my arms and say, 'Oh sure, here's all the money you need, no problem'?" My mother pursed her lips. "It's not like that. It's exactly like that." I snapped. I could feel the years of anger, the pain, the betrayal boiling inside me, rising to the surface like a dam about to break. "Do you have any idea what I went through?" I demanded. "Do you even care? Do you know how many nights I spent in agony, wondering how I was going to survive? Wondering if I'd even make it? While you, all of you, sat in your comfortable homes and didn't lose a wink of sleep over it." My mother shook her head. "That's not fair." "No," I snapped, voice low but furious. "What's not fair is me nearly dying while my rich family pretended I didn't exist. What's not fair is watching the people who were supposed to love me turn their backs without a second thought." Silence. They had nothing to say to that, because deep down, they knew I was right, but I wasn't done. "And now?" I continued, eyes burning into them. "Now you need me. Now you're struggling. And suddenly, family matters again?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Well, let me be crystal clear." I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough to make sure every single word hit like a hammer. "You didn't care about me when I needed you. So I don't care about you now." My mother's face twisted into an ugly scowl. "You're being cruel." "No," I said coldly. "I'm being fair." She opened her mouth to argue again, but I was done. I turned on my heel, walked back inside, and slammed the door shut behind me, and for the first time in years, I felt free. They pounded on the door a few more times, shouted my name, called me selfish, heartless. I didn't care. I just stood there, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of their presence slowly fade. And then, silence. I checked the camera. They were gone. They never reached out again after that. Maybe they finally understood that I wasn't going to be their safety net. Maybe they moved on to try and leech off someone else. Either way, it didn't matter, because I had already given them my answer, and I would never, never look back.
I think this is a clear example of how selfishness can destroy family bonds. The protagonist was left to struggle on their own, and when they finally found success, their family came crawling back. It's frustrating to see how people can only care when it benefits them, but the protagonist's decision to stand firm and not give in was a smart one. At some point, you have to prioritize your own well-being, especially when those around you have shown they're only interested in what you can do for them. Sometimes saying no is the best way to protect yourself. What do you think? Was the protagonist right to cut them off, or should they have helped? Let me know in the comments.
Thanksgiving has always been a weird holiday for me. Kind of like sitting through a rerun of a show where everyone knows their lines, except you're the extra who doesn't get a script. My name's Lucas. I'm 32 now, but this story starts last November, a few months after I sold my second tech startup. It was the kind of sale that gets whispered about in Silicon Valley cafes. 7 figures, quiet NDAs, a handshake that felt like the universe finally nodding in your direction. But at my parents' house, none of that seemed to matter. My dad, Gerald, has always had a clear favorite, my older brother Ryan. Tall, charming, Ivy League business grad with the kind of laugh that makes rooms pause. He was the varsity quarterback and family golden boy, and I was the computer whiz who never really got people. I was used to being the background character in our family gatherings. But that Thanksgiving, that one left a bruise. I pulled into my parents' driveway right on time. Their house looked the same as it always had. White shutters, American flag on the porch, and Mom's ceramic turkey on the windowsill. I brought a bottle of nice red, the kind that needed decanting. My parents don't drink much, but I was trying, you know? I was trying to be the son who doesn't just send checks for birthdays or skip phone calls because he's knee-deep in code. The table was set with 10-place settings. The whole extended family was there. 2 cousins, an aunt who always smelled like lavender and said wildly inappropriate things, and Ryan with his fiancée, who looked like she stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. Everyone had a place card. Neatly written, gold-trimmed, like always. I found mine at the far end of the table, next to the window draft and opposite the kitchen door. It didn't say Lucas. It said the other son. I stared at it. Literally stared. For a second I thought maybe it was a joke. Then I looked at Dad. He was already laughing, like he'd just landed the punchline. Mom giggled nervously, muttering something about Dad getting too creative this year. I forced a smile. My stomach dropped, but I sat down without saying a word. My cousin Olivia gave me a sympathetic glance, but no one said anything else. It was like I didn't have the right to be offended. Dinner went on with the usual small talk, but I barely tasted anything. I'd flown across the country for this, missed a potential partnership meeting just to show up. The turkey was dry, the conversation drier. Then, just before dessert, Dad stood up with a glass and tapped it with his fork. "Let's raise a toast," he said, clinking glass to glass. "To my firstborn, Ryan, who just closed on his new condo downtown, got engaged to this lovely lady here, and is taking his company public next spring." Everyone clapped. I did too. Quietly. He kept going. "Some kids just peak early, I guess." A few people chuckled. Then he turned to me, grinning. "And for Lucas," he reached under the table and handed me a gift-wrapped square. "This might help." It was a self-help book. I wish I was kidding. Something called Rebooting the Inner You. There was a post-it on the cover. "Heard this guy on a podcast. Might help you figure things out." I looked around. No one else looked shocked. I could feel my ears getting hot. My jaw clenched so tight I thought I might crack a tooth. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, smiled like it didn't matter, and tucked the book under my chair. I don't know if it was pride or pure restraint that kept me from standing up and walking out, but I stayed. Ate the damn pumpkin pie like everything was fine. Laughed at a few jokes. Then I left. 2 weeks later, I got an email from HR. "We've been hiring aggressively for our new project division, and I didn't personally vet every applicant anymore. But this one, I saw the name and had to read it twice. Gerald H. Whitman, my dad, applied for a mid-level operations role. Apparently, after his third small business failed, he'd been looking for more stable work. His resume was average, tons of managerial buzzwords, vague results, nothing solid. No mention of me, of course. Just a desperate man trying to re-enter the workforce at 61. I called HR and told them to flag it. Told them I'd handle the interview personally. The day of the interview, he walked into the building like he owned the place. I watched from the glass wall of the conference room as he adjusted his tie and told the receptionist his name. She smiled, offered him coffee, and gestured toward the room. He stepped in, saw me, and froze. It was just the two of us. He blinked, confused. "Lucas," I smiled. "Mr. Whitman, please have a seat." He hesitated, then sat slowly, still trying to process it. I didn't realize that I was the hiring manager. I asked, opening his resume. "Yeah, small world." He gave a nervous chuckle. "Well, I mean, I knew you worked here. Just didn't expect that I'd be in charge." I finished for him. "Or that you'd be walking into my company." He cleared his throat. "I didn't think you'd amount to anything." I smiled wider. Yeah, I've heard that one before. He shifted in his seat. Lucas, come on. Let's not make this awkward. I looked him straight in the eye. Oh, I think we passed awkward at the other son. And then I leaned back, clasped my hands, and said the one thing I'd been waiting years to say. That's when the door opened, and someone else walked in. My assistant, holding a folder marked Internal Review, Whitman Application. Inside was everything. Every insult, every backhanded compliment. The audio from that Thanksgiving toast, thanks to a cousin who had posted it on Instagram. My assistant set the folder down, nodded to me, and walked out. I slid it across the table to my father. Before we continue, I just want to make sure you've read your performance review. He didn't even touch the folder, just stared at me like he'd never seen me before. He didn't say a word at first, just sat there, frozen, like someone had cut the wires to his spine. His mouth opened slightly, then shut again. I don't think he even looked at the folder. His eyes flicked between me and the glass walls like he was trying to find an exit hatch that didn't exist. For a moment, I actually felt a twinge of guilt, just a flicker. This was my dad, after all. The man who used to drive me to chess tournaments, who once stayed up all night helping me build a volcano for the school science fair. But that flicker disappeared the second I remembered the toast. The place card. The years of condescension dressed as parenting. I didn't come here for charity, he said finally, voice low. Good, I replied, leaning forward. Because you're not getting any. His posture stiffened. I've managed teams. Built businesses. You think I'm not qualified? I tapped the folder. You managed 3 businesses into bankruptcy. Your last team left in under 6 months. And you still think QuickBooks Mastery is a competitive edge in 2024. I tilted my head. No, Dad. You're not qualified. But that's not really the issue, is it? He glared. You're enjoying this. I didn't deny it. Because I was. Not in the petty, vindictive way he probably assumed, but in the cathartic, full circle kind of way. The kind of satisfaction that only comes after years of quietly swallowing every jab, every backhanded compliment, every time he introduced me as the one who works with computers or something. This isn't about revenge, I said finally. It's about closure. He snorted. Closure? Lucas, don't play therapist. You think sitting behind a glass desk and throwing fancy titles around makes you better than me? No, I said softly. But it does mean I finally don't need your approval. That shut him up. There was a long silence. Outside the conference room, a few employees passed by, glancing in, then quickly looking away. He didn't notice. He was too busy trying to find the right words, some combination of pride and guilt and authority that used to work on me. But the balance had shifted, and he knew it. I didn't mean for that Thanksgiving to go the way it did, he said eventually, more defensive than apologetic. That's funny, I said, because I don't remember you saying anything after. Not a call, not a message. Just a thank you note to Ryan's fiancée for her cranberry stuffing. He winced. I didn't think it bothered you. I smiled without warmth. That's the problem, isn't it? His jaw clenched. You've always been too sensitive. No, I said calmly. I just stopped pretending it didn't hurt. There was another pause. Then, for the first time in my life, my father looked at me, not with judgment or disappointment, but with something I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was discomfort. Maybe it was the slow realization that the son he'd overlooked for decades now held the pin over his future. Or maybe it was just the cold slap of consequence. I closed the folder. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady. I'm not going to approve your application. Not because of what you did, but because of who you are. And that's not bitterness talking, that's policy. We don't hire people with your track record, regardless of their last name. His eyes narrowed. You're punishing me. No, I said. I'm holding you to the same standards I've held myself to every day since I left home. The difference is, I had to meet those standards. You just expected to be handed a pass. He stood up then, too quickly, the chair scraping harshly against the tile. You're going to regret this. I stood too calmly. I've regretted a lot of things. Staying quiet. Dimming myself down to fit into your idea of who I should be. Wasting years trying to prove I was worth your time. I stepped closer, not angry, just done. But this is the first decision I know I'll sleep well on. He stood there, breathing hard. For a second, I thought he might say something real. But instead, he straightened his tie and walked out without another word. No goodbye. No apology. Just silence and the echo of shoes on tile. I sat back down, closed the folder, took a long breath. Later that day, HR asked me what to do with his application. I told them to file it under conflict of interest, closed. But the story doesn't quite end there. Because a few days later, my mother called. She never called me directly unless it was someone's birthday or she needed help with her laptop. But this time, her voice was tight, worried. I don't know what happened, she said. But your father's been quiet. Really quiet. I didn't know what to say to that. I wasn't sure if I should feel triumphant or just hollow. After all, this wasn't some internet fairy tale. This was real life. And revenge, even when served ice cold in a conference room, never tastes quite as sweet as you think. That night, I sat alone in my condo, staring at the unopened copy of Rebooting the Interview that I'd kept out of spite. I almost threw it away. But instead, I placed it on my bookshelf, spine out. A reminder, not of him, but of me. Because no matter how the rest of the family wanted to frame it, no matter how many toasts or labels they threw around, that Thanksgiving marked something permanent. I wasn't the other son anymore. And no one would ever forget it again. The fallout came slowly, like dust settling after a storm. At first, it was quiet. A couple of passive-aggressive texts from Ryan, he's our dad, man. Don't you think that was a little harsh? Followed by complete radio silence when I didn't respond. Then came the group chat messages from Mom, trying to soften the edges. We're a family, Lucas. Families go through things. As if a lifetime of being sidelined and disrespected could be summed up with things. I muted the chat. I wasn't ready to pretend nothing happened. What really struck me, though, was how quickly the rest of the family circled the wagons, not around Dad, but around the narrative. It was easier to say I overreacted than to admit he'd been cruel. Easier to label me dramatic than to reckon with decades of subtle cruelty. I heard from my cousin Olivia a week later. She was the only one who really reached out and asked how I was without trying to guilt-trip me. You were right, she texted. It's about time someone stood up to him. That meant more than she probably realized. Because growing up, no one ever stood up to Dad. He was the patriarch, the loudest voice at the dinner table, the one everyone danced around to keep the peace. But peace isn't peace if it comes at the cost of one person's dignity. Then, about 3 weeks after the interview, something unexpected happened. HR forwarded me an anonymous tip. Just a simple message, and signed, you might want to double-check your dad's LinkedIn. Looks like he's still claiming to be executive director at your company. I stared at the email for a full minute. I hadn't thought to check. Why would I? But sure enough, I pulled up his profile, and there it was, bold as daylight. My jaw tightened. I scrolled down, and there were posts. Bragging posts. Him sharing articles about leadership and innovation, tagging my company, claiming to be part of driving the next wave of success. I could barely believe the audacity. The same man who couldn't look me in the eye during the interview was now using my company's name like it was his badge of honor. I could feel the blood rushing to my face, not from rage, but from the sheer disbelief. He was leveraging my success to build himself back up, hoping no one would dig too deep. That night, I didn't sleep. I just paced my apartment, flipping through every memory I'd buried. The birthday he forgot because Ryan had a soccer tournament. The graduation dinner where he said, summa cum laude? Yeah, but Ryan got into Wharton. The time he introduced me to a family friend as our little tech guy, does something with websites, I think. And now this. This wasn't just about one Thanksgiving. This wasn't even just about the fake job title. This was about a man who had built his identity on belittling mine until he needed it to survive. The next morning, I called legal. Not HR, legal. We drafted a cease and desist. It was professional, clean, airtight. No emotion. Just facts. You are not, and have never been, employed by this company. Remove all public references or face legal action. We also contacted LinkedIn to report the fraudulent information. But I didn't send it right away. Instead, I printed out the letter, slid it into a plain envelope, and drove to my parents' house. It was a Sunday afternoon. I hadn't been back since Thanksgiving. As I pulled into the driveway, I half expected the porch lights to flicker like some haunted memory was coming back to life. I rang the doorbell. Mom opened it, surprised. She looked older than I remembered. Tired. Lucas, she said softly. Are you? Do you want to come in? I won't be long, I replied. She stepped aside. Dad was sitting in his recliner, TV on low, football game playing. He looked up, startled. Lucas. I walked over, handed him the envelope. Thought I'd deliver this in person. He opened it slowly, like he already knew what was inside. His eyes scanned the letter. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. I gave you a chance to walk away with dignity, I said quietly. to just let things be. But you couldn't help yourself, could you? He still didn't say anything. I'm not a prop in your redemption arc, I added. And I'm not a stepping stone for you to crawl back into relevance. That finally got a reaction. I wasn't, he began, but I held up a hand. Stop. Just stop. I paused. You spent my entire life telling me who I'm not. Not driven enough. Not sociable enough. Not Ryan. And now, suddenly, I'm worth aligning with because you need me. But the thing is, Dad, I don't need you anymore. I haven't for a long time. He stared at me, a flicker of something in his eyes, shame, maybe, or just fear of being irrelevant. I turned to go. Lucas, Mom said softly as I reached the door. He's still your father. I looked at her, then back at him. No, I said quietly. He was my father. Now he's just a man with a folder full of consequences. And I left. I didn't hear from him after that. The LinkedIn page was scrubbed clean within 48 hours. No apology, no explanation. Just silence. And that was fine. Because closure doesn't always come with fireworks or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes, it comes in the form of an empty profile and a silence you no longer fear. The holidays came and went. I didn't go back for Christmas. I spent it with friends who felt more like family anyway, people who toasted me without caveats, who didn't need a label to show me where I stood. And somewhere along the way, I realized something important. I wasn't just reclaiming my identity. I was rewriting it. Not as the other son, not as the background character, but as the man who finally took the pen back and told his own story. A few months passed. Life, as it always does, moved on. My company expanded into a new market, and I was traveling more. New hires, investor meetings, late-night strategy sessions over cold coffee. It was everything I used to dream about back in college when I was building prototypes in my dorm room while Ryan was out partying. And now that dream was real, tangible, mine. But as the days stacked up and winter turned to spring, something strange started happening. I expected silence from my parents, sure, but what I didn't expect was how light I felt. It was as if the weight I'd been carrying for decades, the one I couldn't even name until I'd finally set it down, had vanished. No more trying to impress a man who never clapped when I won, only when Ryan did. No more family dinners that felt like job interviews I was always failing. No more chasing the approval of someone who thought I was only useful when I could be used. I wasn't angry anymore. Not exactly. Just done. One Saturday in March, I got an unexpected call. It was Olivia, my cousin. Hey, she said. You're not going to like this, but you should probably hear it from me. My stomach dropped slightly. What's going on? They're throwing Dad a retirement party. Your dad? Big backyard thing. Balloons, banners, the whole deal. Ryan's flying in with Amanda. And they've been telling everyone you're coming. I blinked. I never said I was. I know. But your mom's been telling people you'll make an appearance. Like it's some kind of family reunion. Everyone's acting like nothing happened. There it was again. The rewrite. The selective memory. The reshaping of events so the narrative made sense for them. My dad didn't fake a job title. He'd volunteered in a consulting capacity. He didn't call me the other son. He was just joking. It was all just one big misunderstanding to sweep under the rug. But I wasn't going back under that rug. Thanks for the heads up, I told Olivia. You're not going, right? She asked. I didn't answer. Because I had a better idea. A few days later, I emailed Amanda, Ryan's fiancée. We'd only spoken a handful of times, but she'd always been polite, and more importantly, perceptive. She was the kind of person who noticed things others missed. And she replied immediately. Absolutely. Let's set it up. Quietly. So here's what I did. The day of the retirement party, the backyard was decked out like a corporate gala. White tents, gold streamers, one of those "Congrats, Gerald" banners strung across the fence. Everyone was dressed like they were auditioning for a country club ad. My mom had outdone herself with the catering. Mini quiches, tiny shrimp cocktails, those weird fancy napkins folded like swans. And yes, my dad was in his element. Standing tall in the center of it all, glass of sparkling cider in hand, telling old stories to people who nodded like they hadn't heard them 100 times before. I waited until the toast. Ryan stood up first, tapped his glass, and began the speech. Polished, rehearsed, the kind of speech you give a man like our father. He talked about a lifetime of leadership, setting the bar, and raising sons who reflect his values. I nearly choked. Then, like clockwork, my dad raised his glass. To family, he said, and a legacy. Especially to my boys, Ryan, and He paused just long enough for that tension to return. "Lucas," he said, as if it was an afterthought or a concession. "Even though he couldn't make it today, we're proud of him, wherever he is." The crowd clapped. The music resumed. And that's when the screen turned on. There was a portable projector set up on the lawn for a planned slideshow, photos from Dad's career, nostalgic moments, stuff like that. But Amanda had helped me swap in a different file. She gave me the time. The cue. The screen lit up, and the first thing that appeared was the company logo. My company. Then, a LinkedIn profile screenshot, my father's, with the fake job title bold and center. Then, a red highlight box circling Executive Director, Strategy Division. The guests went quiet. Another slide, the cease and desist letter. His full name. Company header. Legal watermark. Statement of misrepresentation. And finally, a photo of me taken from a Forbes article I'd been featured in the month before. The headline read, "This founder said no to a toxic past and built a tech empire on his own terms." The last slide? A simple quote. "Sometimes, the people who belittle your worth are the first to claim your success." Then the screen went black. No sound. No applause. I wasn't there. Not in person. But I watched it all unfold via Amanda's quiet live stream, just a discreet phone in her lap. My father's face went pale. His jaw twitched. He didn't speak. Ryan stood frozen, not quite sure whether to defend him or walk away. My mom started whispering to a neighbor, trying to spin it as taken out of context. But the silence from the crowd said it all. The emperor had no clothes. And this time, no one pretended not to see it. Amanda shut off the stream. I sent her a quick thank you. Then I turned off my phone. I spent the rest of the evening on my balcony, sipping a scotch I'd been saving. The city skyline buzzed in the distance. A warm breeze tugged at the corner of the Forbes magazine on my coffee table. It was open to the profile they'd run on me. The first line read, "Some men are born into legacy. Others build their own from the ground up." That night, I slept deeper than I had in years. And in the weeks that followed, something curious happened. The group chat went quiet. Then, slowly, people started reaching out, not to pull me back into the fold, but to apologize. Cousins, aunts, even my mom. Not everyone, of course. Ryan stayed silent. My dad never reached out. But the tone had changed. I wasn't the other son anymore. I was the son who said enough. The one who didn't play the game, who didn't fake the smiles, who didn't let someone else write the final chapter of my story. A few months later, I got a letter. Not an email. A real letter. From my dad. It wasn't long. Just a few lines, in his rigid, all-caps handwriting. "You were right. I didn't see you. Not the way I should have. I don't expect forgiveness. But I am proud of you, whether you believe it or not." There was no return address. Just his name at the bottom. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, but because I didn't need to. I had already said everything I needed to say. Not with words. Not with speeches. But with choices. With boundaries. With truth. Because the greatest revenge isn't humiliation. It's evolution. And I had evolved into someone I never thought I'd get to be. Seen. Respected. Free. My name is David. I'm 29, and I don't think I'll ever forget the feeling of waking up in an ICU bed to the sound of my heart monitor beeping steadily in the dark. My body felt like it had been hit by a truck. The fluorescent lights were dimmed. The room smelled of antiseptic, and there was that constant low hum of machines keeping me alive. My throat was dry from the oxygen tube, my chest sore from whatever they had done to stabilize me. I blinked a few times, trying to piece together how I even got there. The last thing I remembered was collapsing in my apartment after ignoring what I thought was just a bad flu. Turns out, it was pneumonia, severe enough to almost kill me. When the nurse saw I was awake, she smiled gently and asked if I wanted her to call someone. I nodded, expecting that by now someone from my family would have noticed I'd been missing for a day. I gave her my dad's number, and she left the room for a minute. When she came back, she hesitated for a second before saying, "No one picked up, but I left a message." I thanked her and tried not to let the sting settle too deeply. My dad was usually busy, sure, but he had his phone glued to his hand. My mom too. My younger sister, Emma, was constantly posting on social media. I figured maybe I'd wake up to a flood of messages. But hours passed. Then a full day. Not a single call. Not even a text asking if I was okay. It's funny how fast that can mess with your head. When you're alone in a hospital bed, you have nothing to do but think about every choice, every relationship, Every time you've been there for people who can't be bothered to show up for you now. I thought about all the times I'd lent Emma money when she was short on rent, the times I drove 3 hours to help my parents when their car broke down, or how I dropped everything to watch the dog when they wanted a weekend getaway. And now silence. On the third day, just as I was starting to feel strong enough to sit up without feeling dizzy, my phone buzzed. My heart actually leapt for a moment. Finally, someone must have noticed I was gone. But when I unlocked my screen, it wasn't a call. It wasn't even a "how are you?" It was a single text from my dad that read, "We need $50,000 for your sister's wedding. Send it this week." I stared at the screen, my chest tightening, not from pneumonia this time, but from anger. Not even a "hope you're doing okay," after 3 days of radio silence. "No, we heard you were in the hospital. What happened?" Just a demand for money like I was an ATM. I could practically hear his voice in my head, the tone he always used that made it sound like he wasn't asking, he was telling. I didn't reply right away. I just put the phone down and stared at the ceiling, letting the anger simmer. I remembered every time my parents had made me feel like my worth was tied to what I could provide for them. Every birthday that was ignored because Emma had some drama they had to handle instead. Every time I was told, "You're the oldest, you should help out more." And here they were again, proving that nothing had changed. When I was discharged a few days later, I didn't go to my parents' house. I didn't call them. I went straight home, lay on my couch, and just stared at my phone for a long time. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made for this family. I thought about the fact that they didn't even know if I was alive until I texted them myself. And then, finally, I did reply, but not how they expected. I told my dad no. No explanation, no apology. Just a simple no. And then I blocked his number. I blocked my mom. I blocked Emma. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. But that was just the beginning. The calls from unknown numbers started within hours. The emails followed. Then messages from relatives I barely spoke to, all with the same theme. "Your sister's wedding is in 2 months. Stop being selfish." They had no idea where I had been the past week, no idea what I had gone through. And yet somehow, I was the villain for saying no. The guilt trips turned into insults. The insults turned into threats of being cut off from the family forever. And I think that's what finally flipped the switch in me. Something inside me hardened that day. I stopped feeling sad. I stopped feeling guilty. I stopped feeling like I owed them anything. And that's when I decided, if they thought I was the bad guy for finally standing up for myself, then fine, I'd play the bad guy. The next time I heard from them, it wasn't a message. It was something else entirely, something that made me sit up straight and laugh out loud in disbelief. When I laughed that day, it wasn't because anything was funny. It was because I finally realized just how little I mattered to them beyond what I could provide. The thing that made me laugh was an email, subject line in all caps. "Emma's wedding is the most important day of our lives." I clicked it open and was greeted with a wall of text from my mom. It wasn't an apology for ignoring me while I was in the ICU. It wasn't even an acknowledgement that I had been sick. It was a detailed spreadsheet of expenses for Emma's wedding: venue deposit, catering, flowers, DJ, dress alterations, family vacation fund, whatever that meant. At the very bottom of the email was a line that said, "David's contribution, $50,000, due by next Friday." It was written as if this was a formal contract, something already agreed upon. I sat back in my chair and just let it sink in. My contribution? Like this was some sort of mandatory tax I had to pay to earn my place in the family. Like if I didn't pay, I'd be in default and lose my privileges as a son. I could almost hear my dad's voice. "Family helps family, David. Don't be selfish." I didn't respond. Instead, I let the silence do the talking. Days passed, and that silence must have driven them insane because soon I started getting group texts with my mom, dad, and Emma all together. Emma chimed in first. "David, you're seriously stressing mom out. Can you just send the money so we can move forward with planning?" My mom followed up. "Your sister deserves this. She's waited her whole life for this day. You make more than enough to help." Then my dad. "I already told the venue we have the money. Don't embarrass us." Embarrass them. That word stuck with me. I almost died a week ago, and they were worried about embarrassment. When I didn't reply to the group chat, Emma decided to take it to social media. I woke up one morning to find she had posted a long paragraph on Instagram, accompanied by a picture of her in a wedding dress. The caption read, "So excited for our big day? Sad that certain family members are making it about themselves and refusing to help out like they promised. It hurts when the people you love don't show up for you. She didn't name me, but everyone knew who she meant. Mutual friends started DMing me, asking if everything was okay, telling me I should just be the bigger person and don't ruin your sister's wedding over money. It was surreal. Somehow, overnight, I became the villain in a story I didn't even write. The worst part was the phone call from my aunt. She was the one relative I actually liked, the one person I thought might take my side. She called me one afternoon and said, "David, I heard what happened. Your mom is in tears. Emma's devastated. This is supposed to be a happy time for everyone, and you're making it ugly. Just send the money and end this drama." I was quiet for a long time. Then I said, "Aunt May, I was in the ICU last week. Did anyone tell you that?" There was silence on the other end. Then she said, "No, what happened?" I explained everything. How I collapsed, how no one visited, how I woke up to a text asking for money. I heard her suck in a breath, and for a moment I thought maybe she'd get it. But then she said, softly, "I'm sorry you went through that. David, I really am. But this wedding is important for your parents' reputation. Don't let a misunderstanding ruin everything." A misunderstanding. I had nearly died, and it was a misunderstanding. I thanked her for calling and hung up before I said something I'd regret. That night, I got another email from my dad. This one wasn't a polite request, it was an ultimatum. "David, you have until Friday to wire the money. If you don't, you are no longer welcome in this family. We will not have someone who refuses to support his sister on the most important day of her life." I read that line over and over. No longer welcome in this family. As if family was something you could revoke like a subscription. It stung, but not in the way I expected. It didn't make me feel guilty this time. It made me angry. Furious, actually. Because the truth was, this wasn't about the wedding. It never was. This was about control. My parents had always used guilt to get their way. When I was a teenager, they made me give up a scholarship to a college out of state because family comes first. When Emma wanted to go on a trip to Europe and couldn't afford it, they told me to lend her the money because you're the responsible one. When I bought my first house, they convinced me to let Emma live there rent-free until she got on her feet, which ended up being 2 years. And every time I tried to say no, I was met with the same line. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" I realized I'd been playing their game my whole life. And I was done. The next day, I made a point of posting on my own social media. A simple picture of me sitting on my couch with my dog, smiling, looking healthy again. The caption, "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find peace." Surround yourself with people who care about you, not just what you can do for them. I didn't mention names. I didn't need to. Within an hour, Emma sent me a furious text from a random number. I had blocked her. "Are you seriously trying to make me look bad in front of everyone? Grow up, David. You're pathetic." I didn't reply. That weekend, I got an invitation in the mail for Emma's engagement party. It was printed on thick, expensive cardstock, the kind you know cost a fortune. The invite read, "Please join us for an evening of celebration. Formal attire required." At the bottom, in handwriting that I recognized as my mom's, were the words, "We expect to see you there. Bring your checkbook." That was the moment something inside me snapped. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't even feel sad anymore. I just felt this cold, focused clarity. They weren't going to stop until I gave them what they wanted. And I wasn't going to give it to them. Not only that, I decided they were going to regret ever trying to force me. So I made a plan. But before I could put it into action, something happened that raised the stakes even higher. Something that showed me just how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. The day of Emma's engagement party came and went, and true to my word, I didn't show up. I stayed home, cooked myself dinner, and watched a movie. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. Maybe, just maybe, they'd take the hint that I was done being their walking bank account. But then the real betrayal happened. It started the following Monday morning when I logged into my online banking to pay some bills. My stomach dropped. My savings account, the one I had been building for years, was down by $25,000. At first I thought it had to be a glitch. I went through the transactions one by one and saw a wire transfer from my account to an event planning company on the exact date of Emma's engagement party. My hands were shaking as I called the bank. They confirmed that the transfer had been initiated online from my login. I told them it wasn't me, that I hadn't authorized anything, and they froze the account immediately. But the damage was done. When I asked if they could reverse the transaction, they said it would be investigated but could take weeks, maybe months, to resolve, and that it wasn't guaranteed. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what just happened. The only people who had ever known my passwords were my parents. Years ago, when I was in college and needed them to help pay my rent while I was traveling, I'd given my dad my login information just in case. I had changed it since then, or so I thought, but apparently, at some point, I'd given him access again when he asked for help filing taxes. I never imagined he would actually use it to take money without asking. I called him. My voice was shaking with anger. "Dad," I said, "did you transfer money out of my account?" He was silent for a moment. Then he sighed as if I were the one inconveniencing him. "David, don't be dramatic. We told you the wedding expenses couldn't wait. You left us no choice." "No choice," I repeated, my voice rising. "You stole from me." "Watch your tone," he snapped. "This is for your sister. For the family. You should be thanking me for stepping up and doing what needed to be done." My blood went cold. "Stepping up? You drained my account without permission. That's not stepping up. That's theft." "You're being selfish again," he said, completely unfazed. "We'll pay you back eventually. But right now, Emma needs this. The deposits had to be made this weekend, or we'd lose the venue. You wouldn't want to humiliate her, would you?" I was so angry I could barely see straight. "Do you even care that I was in the ICU last week? That I almost died? And the first thing you think to do when I'm finally home is to take my money without asking?" There was a pause on the line. Then he said flatly, "You're alive, aren't you? So it's fine. Stop making this about you." I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. My chest hurt, my head was pounding, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about trust, about respect, about the fact that my own father thought it was okay to violate my privacy and raid my savings just to throw a fancy party. An hour later, Emma texted me from yet another random number. "Thanks for finally helping out. You should have seen the look on Mom's face when the planner confirmed the deposit. Maybe you do care about this family after all." I didn't reply. That night, I changed every password I had. Bank accounts, email, everything. I set up two-factor authentication and moved the remainder of my savings to a completely separate bank. I even contacted HR at work and told them to send my paychecks to the new account going forward. I wasn't taking any chances, but the sense of betrayal stayed with me. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the phone call with my dad in my head, hearing him say, "You left us no choice." As if I were some obstacle they had to work around. As if my money existed for them to use whenever they wanted. The next weekend, things escalated even further. I came home from running errands to find a car parked in my driveway. It was my parents. They were standing on my porch, my mom holding a folder of papers. I didn't want to let them in, but they refused to leave, so I cracked the door open just enough to speak. "What do you want?" I asked. My mom gave me a look of disappointment, the same look she used to give me as a kid when I got a bad grade. "David, we need to talk like adults. This cold shoulder thing you're doing isn't healthy." "Healthy?" I said incredulously. "You stole from me." My dad stepped forward. "We already told you. We'll pay it back. But we also need to settle this once and for all. Here." He handed me the folder. Inside was a document labeled Family Agreement. It was basically a contract stating that I would contribute $50,000 to Emma's wedding, with the $25,000 already taken being counted as my first installment. At the bottom was a space for my signature. I stared at them, completely stunned. "You came to my house to get me to sign this." "This is about keeping the peace," my mom said softly. "Once you sign, we can all move forward and put this behind us." I felt something inside me break. Not just crack, break. I realized right then that this wasn't just about money. This was about control. About making sure I stayed under their thumb forever. I handed the folder back without signing and said, "Get off my property." My dad's face turned red. "David, if you walk away from this, don't bother coming to the wedding. Don't bother coming to Christmas. Don't bother coming back at all." I opened the door wider and pointed to the driveway. "Good. Now leave." They left without another word, but I could see the fury in their eyes. That night, as I sat alone in my living room, staring at the unsigned agreement, something inside me shifted permanently. This wasn't a family conflict anymore. This was a war, and I was done playing defense. I was going to protect myself, my future, and everything I had worked for, and I wasn't just going to stop them from taking more. I was going to make sure they regretted ever trying to use me like this. What happened next set the stage for everything that followed. The revenge, the fallout, the moment when the entire family finally saw me not as their personal bank account, but as someone they should have never underestimated. After they left that night, my house felt colder than it ever had before. I sat on the couch in silence, the unsigned family agreement, lying on the coffee table like a poison I couldn't throw away yet. I kept staring at it, feeling this strange mix of grief and anger. It felt like I'd just buried something, the last shreds of hope that maybe, one day, my parents would treat me like a son instead of a resource. I didn't sleep that night. I barely slept all week. When I closed my eyes, I saw my dad's face, red with anger, telling me not to bother coming back. I saw my mom's calm, almost pitying look, like she was disappointed that I wouldn't just fall in line. And I heard Emma's smug little text message, thanking me for helping out. I started questioning everything. Was I overreacting? Was I really being selfish? There were moments where I nearly convinced myself to just send the money and make it all go away. But every time I reached for my phone, I remembered waking up in the ICU, alone, with no one there but the nurse who barely knew my name. That memory kept me grounded. It reminded me that this wasn't just a disagreement over a wedding. This was a pattern, one that had gone unchecked for too long. Still, the silence was brutal. I hadn't realized how much of my daily life involved my family until it was gone. No texts from my mom about family dinners. No calls from my dad to check in, which usually meant ask for something. No random pictures from Emma showing off a new dress or a meal she'd made. It was like someone had pressed mute on an entire part of my life. And my so-called friends? They didn't exactly make things better. A few of them reached out, mostly to tell me I should just let it go, or family is family. One even said, "You know Emma's wedding is once in a lifetime, right? You can always make more money." I stopped replying to messages after that. For a while, I let myself sink into that low place. I went to work, came home, and didn't do much else. I stopped cooking, stopped cleaning, stopped going to the gym. The house was quiet, but not in a peaceful way, in a hollow, suffocating way. I caught myself sitting in the dark more nights than I'd like to admit, just staring at the wall and wondering if maybe they were right about me. But slowly, quietly, something started to shift. Maybe it was the quiet itself. Maybe it was the fact that for the first time in years, no one was calling me with a new emergency to solve. Maybe it was just the clarity that comes when you've got nothing left to lose. One night, I got up, turned on every light in the house, and started cleaning. I scrubbed the kitchen counters, vacuumed the living room, organized the piles of unopened mail. It wasn't about the mess. It was about reclaiming something, my space, my time, my life. When I finished, I sat back down on the couch, looked at the family agreement one last time, and tore it in half. Then I tore it again and again until it was nothing but confetti scattered across my coffee table. I took a deep breath. That was the night I decided I wasn't going to keep playing defense anymore. The next morning, I opened a new notebook and started writing. Not an angry letter, not a rant, a plan. I listed every account my parents might still have access to, every joint obligation I'd ever agreed to with them, every way they could possibly reach into my life and pull the rug out from under me again. Then I wrote action steps next to each one. Close the joint emergency credit card? Done. Remove my dad as the emergency contact at work? Done. Transfer my investments to a new brokerage they didn't know about? Done. I started thinking further ahead too. If they were willing to take $25,000 without asking, what else might they try? Could they show up at my house again? Could they try to manipulate relatives into harassing me? Could they even try to take legal action if I refused to pay? So I made another list, people I needed to talk to. HR, to make sure all my personal info was locked down. The bank, to flag my accounts for any suspicious activity. A lawyer, just in case I needed one down the road. It wasn't just about protecting my money anymore. It was about protecting my peace of mind. But even as I was putting these pieces in place, there was still this gnawing ache inside me. The part of me that wanted someone, anyone, to say, "We were wrong. We're sorry. We care about you more than we care about a wedding." That apology never came. Instead, a few weeks later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was my uncle, the one who lived out of state and rarely got involved in family drama. "David," he said, his voice hesitant. Your dad told me what's going on. He said you've cut everyone off completely. I didn't say anything. He went on. Look, I don't know all the details, but I do know this. Your parents are telling everyone you're unstable, that you've been acting erratic since you got sick. They said you're refusing to help because you're bitter and resentful. I figured you'd want to know what's being said about you. Something in my chest went cold, not just because of what he said, but because I wasn't even surprised. They can say whatever they want, I said flatly. I'm done trying to prove myself to people who never cared about me in the first place. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, if you ever need a place to go, you've got family here. Just remember that. I thanked him and hung up. After that, something hardened in me completely. If they wanted to paint me as the villain, fine. I could live with that. But I wasn't going to let them get away with what they did, not just taking my money, but trying to destroy my reputation when I refused to play along. That's when my plan started to grow teeth. It wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about making sure there were consequences. And the perfect opportunity was coming sooner than I thought, because Emma's wedding wasn't just a private family affair. It was a huge event, with business partners, extended relatives, and half the town invited. If they thought I was just going to stay quiet and let them spin their story, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. But before I could make my move, there was one last blow that hit me. Something that made me feel like I had truly hit rock bottom, but also solidified that I was on the right path. A letter arrived in the mail. A legal notice. From my own father. It claimed that the $25,000 they took was a gift I had agreed to, and that if I didn't send the remaining $25,000, they would pursue remedies to enforce the family agreement. There it was in black and white. My own parents were threatening to sue me. I sat there with the letter in my hands, my chest tight, my pulse pounding. And then, strangely, I felt calm. Completely calm. Because this wasn't a family fight anymore. This was war. And I was done being on the losing side. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with that legal notice still in my hands, my coffee growing cold beside me, and feeling something click in my head. It was the strangest thing. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even scared. For the first time in my life, I felt completely in control. That letter wasn't a threat. It was a gift. It gave me permission to stop pretending this was about family. It made everything crystal clear. My parents and sister had chosen to treat me like an adversary, not a son or a brother. And if this was going to be a fight, I was going to win. The very next day, I took a personal day from work and drove straight to a lawyer's office. I had no idea what to expect. I'd never even consulted a lawyer before. But as soon as I explained the situation, the attorney's eyebrows shot up. They used your login credentials to access your account and transfer funds without authorization? He repeated, flipping through the documents I'd brought. Yes, I said. And now they're claiming I agreed to it and threatening legal action if I don't send more. He let out a low whistle. David, this isn't just a civil matter. This could be criminal. If you want, we can file a police report today. At the very least, we can draft a cease and desist letter and put them on notice that any further harassment will be met with legal action. For the first time in months, I smiled. Do it, I said. Within a week, that letter was sent, not just to my parents, but to Emma as well. It was polite, professional, and absolutely devastating. It outlined the unauthorized transfer, demanded repayment within 30 days, and warned that any further attempts to coerce or defame me would result in legal escalation. It even cited specific state laws about fraud and unauthorized access. The silence that followed was deafening. No calls, no texts, no more letters. For a brief moment, I thought they might actually back down. In that quiet, I started focusing on myself for the first time in years. I cleaned up my diet, started running again, and went back to the gym. The first week was hard. My body felt heavy from months of stress and inactivity. But by the end of the month, I could feel the difference. My energy came back. I was sleeping through the night again. Work started to improve too. Without the constant drama of my family draining me, I was sharper, more focused. I started volunteering for projects I used to shy away from. My boss noticed. One day, he called me into his office and said, David, you've been killing it lately. There's a senior position opening up next quarter. You should apply. I did. And a few months later, I got the promotion, along with a substantial raise. With the extra income, I started shoring up my financial position. I maxed out my retirement contributions, opened a high-yield savings account, and even dipped my toes into investing in a rental property with a friend from work. It felt good. No, it felt powerful. To know that every step I was taking was securing a future that was mine alone, completely separate from my parents' influence. Meanwhile, word about the legal letter must have started spreading through the family grapevine because I started getting quiet, almost hesitant messages from cousins and extended relatives. Some of them wanted to hear my side of the story. Others just wanted to check in. A few admitted they'd been told I'd gone off the deep end, but now they were starting to wonder if maybe there was more to the story. I didn't badmouth my parents or Emma. I didn't need to. I just told the truth. That I'd been in the ICU, that no one came, that my account had been drained without my consent. And then I let them sit with that information. The tide started to turn. I noticed that Emma stopped tagging certain relatives in her wedding planning posts. My mom's Facebook activity went suspiciously quiet. Even my dad, who usually couldn't resist sending long family updates, stopped posting altogether. It was like watching a ship slowly start to list to one side. Then came the real turning point. The bank finished its investigation. I got a call one afternoon from the fraud department confirming that the $25,000 transfer had been unauthorized. Not only were they crediting the money back to my account, but they also confirmed that the IP address used to initiate the transfer matched my parents' home network. I can't describe the satisfaction I felt in that moment. It wasn't just about getting my money back. It was about proof. Hard, undeniable proof that I hadn't made this up, that I wasn't being dramatic, that I wasn't the selfish son they had painted me as. When I told my lawyer, he grinned and said, "This strengthens your position considerably. If they try to push back, we have all the leverage now." And that's when I realized I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was winning. The timing couldn't have been better because Emma's wedding was getting closer. Invitations had already gone out, and apparently it was shaping up to be the social event of the season. A massive venue, a live band, a guest list packed with business partners, distant relatives, and family friends. I hadn't been invited, of course. My name had been scrubbed from everything. But that didn't bother me. In fact, it gave me an idea. I started quietly preparing for the next move. I gathered every piece of documentation I had, the bank statements, the lawyer's letter, the confirmation of the fraud investigation, and organized them neatly in a folder. Then I had copies made, just in case. I also started reconnecting with certain relatives and family friends who I knew would be at the wedding. Not to gossip, but to have casual, calm conversations where I simply shared what had happened from my perspective. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't get emotional. I just laid out the facts. The reactions were telling. Some were shocked. Some were angry, not at me, but at my parents. One family friend even said, "You know, we've always suspected your dad was a bit controlling, but we never thought he'd go this far." I could feel the narrative shifting. And as I watched it happen, I realized that I didn't even need to crash the wedding or make some dramatic scene to get my point across. By the time the big day rolled around, half the room would already know the truth, and the other half would be wondering why there was so much tension in the air. But I wasn't done yet. I had one last card to play. One final move that would make sure my parents and Emma understood, once and for all, that I was no longer someone they could manipulate or control. And as the wedding date drew closer, that plan started to take shape in a way that was smarter, sharper, and more devastating than anything I could have imagined back when this all started. Because I wasn't just the victim anymore. I wasn't just the son who got taken advantage of. I was the one holding all the cards now. And when the day came, I was going to make sure everyone saw exactly who they'd been dealing with all along. But then something happened just a few days before the wedding. Something that raised the stakes even higher and gave me the perfect opening to execute my plan in a way that would shock everyone in that room. The week before Emma's wedding, I was feeling sharper than I had in months. My mornings were calm, my work was going well, and I was sleeping soundly for the first time since this nightmare began. But then, one afternoon, I got an unexpected call from a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something made me pick up. "David," a man's voice said. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Daniel from the event planning company," he said, his tone cautious. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to confirm a detail for the wedding invoice. You're listed as the primary contact for payment on the final balance. We've received partial payment, but there's still $35,000 outstanding. Can I get confirmation that will be wired by Thursday? I almost laughed. Not out of humor, out of disbelief. Wait, I said. You're telling me my name is on the payment contract? Yes, Daniel said. Signed by your father, but under your name. Is that incorrect? It was like the air went still around me. I asked him to send me a copy of the signed contract. He hesitated, probably wondering if he was about to step into some messy family drama, but eventually agreed. When the PDF landed in my inbox an hour later, I opened it and felt my jaw tighten. There it was, plain as day. A service contract for Emma's wedding, with my name printed on the payment line, my old email address listed as the primary contact, and a signature that looked suspiciously like my dad's poor attempt to forge mine. I sat there staring at it for a long time, the pieces clicking into place one by one. This was why my dad was so confident I owed them. This was why they kept insisting I had already agreed to pay. They had literally signed my name on a contract without telling me. I forwarded the document straight to my lawyer. His reply came within minutes. This is forgery, and it's not just a civil matter. This could be prosecuted criminally. This is very strong leverage, David. Strong leverage. Those words made something electric run through me. I asked him what my options were. He laid them out calmly, professionally. I could press charges and potentially have my father investigated for fraud. I could send a demand letter forcing them to pay the full remaining balance, clearing my name from the contract, and reimbursing any costs. I could wait, let them go through with the wedding, knowing that the venue would come after them when the remaining payment didn't come through under my name. That last one made me pause. Because as much as I wanted justice, I also wanted them to understand exactly what they had done to me, to feel, even for a moment, the same fear and powerlessness I felt when I saw my savings drained. So I decided to wait. But I didn't just sit back and do nothing. I started gathering every piece of documentation I had into one meticulously organized folder. The forged contract, the bank's fraud investigation results, the cease and desist letter, every email, every text message. I even included the engagement party invitation with my mom's handwritten note telling me to bring my checkbook. I made multiple copies, one physical, one digital on a secure drive. Then I wrote a letter to go along with it. Not a rant, not an angry tirade, just a calm, clear statement of facts. I explained exactly what had happened, how they had crossed every line imaginable, and how their actions had consequences they could no longer control. And then I made a list of people who would receive it if things went too far, relatives, close family friends, and, crucially, a few of my dad's business partners who I knew would be attending the wedding. The more I prepared, the more focused I became. There was no fear anymore, no hesitation, just clarity. And then, almost as if the universe was giving me a sign, another piece of leverage fell right into my lap. I got an email from a cousin who worked in finance. He'd heard whispers that my parents were in more financial trouble than they were letting on. Apparently, they'd taken out a home equity loan last year and were behind on payments. The wedding wasn't just about Emma's big day, it was about appearances. They were using this event to keep up the image that everything was fine, that the family was thriving. Suddenly, everything made sense. The pressure, the desperation, the lengths they were willing to go to. They weren't just trying to control me, they were trying to use me to save face. And that was when the shape of my plan fully came together. I wasn't going to just confront them privately. I wasn't going to yell, scream, or beg. I was going to let them walk into that wedding day believing they'd won, believing they had forced me into silence. And then I was going to take that illusion apart piece by piece, calmly and publicly, in a way that would leave no doubt about who was really in control. It wouldn't be dramatic in the way they feared. No scene-stealing tantrum, no shouting match. But it would be unforgettable. Over the next few days, I lined up every detail. I made sure the documentation was ready. I spoke to my lawyer one more time and got his blessing that what I was planning was legal and protected. He even smiled when I told him my idea and said, "That's brilliant, David." And they won't see it coming. The night before the wedding, I stood in my living room, staring at the folder of documents on the table. The house was quiet, but not hollow anymore. It felt alive. It felt like my house, my life, and my choice. For months, I'd been playing catch-up, reacting to everything they threw at me. But now, I was the one setting the stage. And when the curtain went up tomorrow, everyone would finally see the truth about my parents, about Emma, and about the lengths they had gone to try and control me. And the best part was, I wouldn't have to raise my voice once. Because this time, I was ready. This time, I had all the power. And by the end of tomorrow, everyone would know it. But then, just hours before the wedding, I received one final message. One that would turn my carefully laid plan into something far bigger, far more dramatic than even I had anticipated. The morning of the wedding, I woke up earlier than usual, my mind surprisingly calm. The sun was streaming through the curtains, birds were chirping outside, and for a moment, you wouldn't think today was going to be anything more than an ordinary Saturday. But as I showered and dressed, that quiet clarity I'd been carrying for weeks turned into a steady hum of determination. I had no intention of attending the wedding, not as a guest, anyway. But I had been careful with my timing. The folder of documents was packed in my briefcase, along with the calm letter I'd written, and my phone was fully charged with every screenshot, every piece of proof neatly organized in an album, ready to be shown if needed. Around noon, just as I was finishing breakfast, I got the message. It was from a withheld number, no name, just a single line. You should know they're telling everyone you're mentally unstable. They said you tried to sabotage the wedding and they had to cut you off for everyone's safety. I sat there staring at the message, a small laugh escaping me. Safety. That was the narrative they'd chosen now, that I was dangerous, unhinged, a liability. For a moment, I almost pitied them. They were so desperate to stay in control that they'd rather destroy my reputation than face the truth. But then I realized something. This message wasn't bad news. It was the final push I needed. If they wanted to drag my name through the mud in front of everyone, then everyone was going to hear my side, whether my parents liked it or not. I didn't go to the ceremony. I let that part pass quietly. But I knew there would be a reception afterward, a big one, the kind where everyone was seated at tables and speeches were made. And that was where I planned to deliver my quiet, calculated strike. I drove to the venue later that afternoon, parking far enough away that I wouldn't be noticed right away. The building was stunning, a sprawling banquet hall, decorated with white flowers and golden arches, the kind of place that screamed, "Look how perfect we are." I waited until I knew everyone was seated and the first round of toasts had been made, and then I walked inside. The look on my mother's face when she saw me was priceless. Her smile froze, her champagne flute halfway to her lips. My dad stiffened in his chair. Emma, radiant in her dress, looked at me with open disgust. I didn't make a scene. I didn't raise my voice. I simply walked over to an empty table near the back, opened my briefcase, and began placing neatly printed folders, one on each table within reach of the guests I'd chosen in advance. Each folder contained the same thing: the bank's fraud investigation results, the copy of the forged contract with my name on it, the lawyer's cease and desist letter, and my calm, measured explanation of what had happened. The room started to murmur as people opened them. Conversations quieted. Heads began to turn toward my parents' table. My dad was the first to speak. "David," he hissed, standing up. "What do you think you're doing?" I looked at him evenly and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'm telling the truth. You've had your turn." There was a ripple through the room, the kind of electric silence that means everyone is suddenly very, very interested. "I'm not here to ruin Emma's day," I continued, my voice steady. "I'm here to clear my name. You've been telling people I'm unstable, that I'm bitter, that I refuse to help. What you didn't tell them is that you drained my bank account without permission, forged my signature on a contract, and threatened to sue me when I refused to give you more." Gasps echoed through the hall. Someone dropped a fork. My mom tried to stand, but I raised a hand. "You don't need to defend yourself. Everyone here can see the documents. They can decide for themselves." And then I sat back down. I didn't need to say another word. One by one, people started flipping through the folders, their faces changing as they read. I saw my uncle, the one who had warned me about the rumors, shake his head slowly, his jaw tight. I saw one of my dad's business partners push back from the table and stalk out of the room, phone already to his ear. My parents didn't speak. Emma started crying, not the delicate kind of crying you see in movies, but the ugly, angry kind, her makeup streaking down her face. My dad's face turned purple, and my mom looked like she might faint. I stayed for another 5 minutes, letting the weight of the truth settle over the room like a heavy curtain. Then I stood, picked up my briefcase, and walked out without looking back. The last thing I heard before the doors closed behind me was the low, furious whisper of voices, guests demanding answers, relatives asking why no one told them the truth, the band awkwardly trying to play something soft to fill the silence. Outside, I took a deep breath of the cool evening air. For the first time since this all started, I felt light. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just free. I didn't stay to see what happened next. I didn't need to. I knew that by the end of the night, the perfect image my parents had tried so hard to build would be in pieces. And I knew this was only the beginning. Because the fallout from tonight wasn't just going to hit them socially. It was going to hit them financially, legally, and personally. And I was ready for every last bit of it. But the very next morning, I woke up to something I hadn't expected. Something that made the fallout even bigger, louder, and more public than I ever could have orchestrated on my own. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop. At first, I thought it might be my alarm, but when I grabbed it from the nightstand, I saw dozens of notifications, texts, emails, even tagged posts on social media. Word had spread faster than I could have imagined. I opened the first message. It was from my uncle. "David, you lit a fire last night." People were furious. Half the guests left early. The band packed up before dessert was served. Your dad stormed out. Your mom was crying in the parking lot. Emma was hysterical. She accused them of ruining her wedding. I sat there, stunned for a moment, then slowly exhaled. I hadn't wanted to humiliate Emma, but after everything she'd done, publicly shaming me, siding with my parents while knowing nothing about what I'd gone through, I couldn't bring myself to feel guilty. The second message was from the event planner, Daniel. "Hi, David. Following up, I received confirmation this morning that the remaining balance on the wedding was paid, not under your name, but from a new account in your father's. I've also updated our records to remove your name entirely from all contracts." That was the first real victory, proof that they had finally been forced to take full responsibility. But the biggest blow came later that afternoon, in the form of a phone call from my lawyer. "David," he said, his tone almost cheerful, "I just got word that your father's business partner formally withdrew from a joint project they were running. Apparently, he was at the wedding and saw the documentation you shared. He doesn't want to risk being associated with anyone under investigation for fraud." I blinked. "Under investigation?" "Yes," he said. "I took the liberty of forwarding the forged contract and the bank report to the district attorney's office, just as we discussed as an option. They've opened a preliminary inquiry. It doesn't mean charges yet, but it's enough to put significant pressure on your father to make this right quickly." I hung up the phone and sat back, letting the news wash over me. My parents had tried to intimidate me with legal threats, and now it was them staring down the possibility of real legal consequences. By that evening, my relatives started calling one by one, most of them apologizing. My aunt, who had told me to just send the money, actually cried on the phone. "I didn't know, David," she said. "I believe what they told me. I'm so sorry I didn't check on you after you were in the hospital. I should have been there." Even my cousins, the ones who usually stayed out of family drama, texted me saying they supported me and that what I did at the wedding was legendary. Apparently, people were already calling it the night the family secrets came out. And then came the message I had been waiting for, from my mom. It was short, almost desperate. "David, please call me. We need to talk." For a moment, I just stared at it. Weeks ago, I might have jumped at the chance. But now, I wasn't sure what there was left to say. Still, something in me wanted closure. So I called. She answered on the first ring, her voice trembling. "David, we never meant for things to go this far. Your father is, well, he's very upset. People are talking, and we can't even go to the store without someone asking questions. Emma isn't speaking to us. We just wanted to give her a nice wedding. You forged my name," I said quietly. "You stole from me. You lied about me to the entire family. And now you're worried about what people are saying about you." There was a long pause. Then she whispered, "We don't know what to do anymore." "You stop," I said. "You stop lying. You stop using me. You stop pretending this was ever about family. And you fix what you broke. Every cent you took, every rumor you spread, every contract you signed with my name on it." "And if we do?" she asked, almost pleading. "Then maybe," I said, "you can start earning back my trust. But that's going to take a long time. And this time, it's going to be on my terms." She started crying softly on the other end. I didn't hang up immediately, but I didn't comfort her either. When she finally said goodbye, her voice was small, like she knew this was the first time I wasn't going to bend. Over the next few weeks, things changed quickly. The money they had taken was repaid in full. The legal threats disappeared. My lawyer even confirmed that my dad signed a formal agreement releasing me from any future family obligations. Emma posted one last bitter message online, something about losing a brother, but it didn't get the sympathy she was hoping for. By then, most people knew the truth. The comments were full of people telling her she was lucky I hadn't pressed charges. For the first time in years, I felt like my life was mine again. And then came the final moment, the one that made everything worth it. I ran into one of my dad's former business partners at a coffee shop. He recognized me, came over, and said, "I was at that wedding. What you did, it took guts." Most people would have stayed quiet. I nodded, not sure what to say. He smiled. "Your parents underestimated you. They thought you'd stay the quiet, dependable son forever. But you showed everyone that you won't be controlled. That's not something they'll forget anytime soon." As I walked out of that coffee shop, the late afternoon sun warm on my face, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. Peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was just done. Done being the fixer. Done being the scapegoat. Done being the son who always said yes, no matter what it cost him. And as I unlocked my car, I caught myself smiling. Not because I'd won, but because I had finally, truly walked away. I glanced back at the coffee shop window and saw my reflection, calm, steady, and free, and I thought, this is who I was meant to be all along. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I drove home with the windows down, the wind in my hair, and not a single ounce of guilt in my chest. Because the truth was out. The damage was done. And this time, I wasn't the one left picking up the pieces. This time they were. And I was finally, completely free. I'm Austin, I'm 34, and if you told me a year ago that my family would make me feel like an intruder in my own bloodline, I would have laughed it off. I always thought the tension between my parents, my younger sister Chloe, and me was just the usual sibling favoritism that every family seems to have. But what happened that night at the family party, that single, humiliating moment where my daughter was reduced to tears in front of dozens of relatives, was the spark that burned down every excuse I'd been telling myself for years. I grew up being the quiet one, the one who did what was asked, kept my head down, and never made too much noise. My parents praised Chloe constantly, her grades, her beauty, her charm, and while I wasn't neglected, I was the afterthought. If Chloe came home with a B, it was framed on the fridge like it was a Nobel Prize. If I came home with an A, my mom would pat my shoulder and say, "Good, Austin. Keep trying harder." I learned to live with it. I convinced myself that being the responsible one, the provider, the steady rock, had its own worth. When I became a father, though, my perspective changed. My little girl, Mia, is 7 now. She's quiet like me, thoughtful, with this way of holding back until she feels safe. Every time she smiles, it feels like the world makes sense again. And maybe that's why that night at the family party is burned into me so deeply, because they didn't just insult me anymore, they went after her. It was supposed to be a celebration. Chloe had gotten some minor local award for community service, something my parents had been boasting about for weeks. I went because I wanted Mia to feel connected, to know she had a family beyond just me. The hall was rented out, the lights were strung across the ceiling, music played low, and tables were stacked with food. I remember holding Mia's hand, her small fingers clutching mine as she looked around nervously. She doesn't like crowds, but I whispered, "It'll be fine. We'll just say hi, grab some cake, and leave." I meant it. I just wanted her to feel part of something. But family has a way of proving you wrong when you let your guard down. It happened so fast, it almost felt unreal. I had turned to grab Mia a slice of cake, and when I looked back, she was standing frozen in front of Chloe. My sister was towering over her wine glass tilted casually in her hand, her lips curled into a smirk. "She's just like her father," she announced loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Pathetic. The word dropped heavy into the silence that followed. I saw Mia's eyes widen, her cheeks flush red, and then the tears started falling. It wasn't the small, quiet kind of crying. This was raw, painful, the kind that rips through you because you know you're being laughed at. I moved before I even thought. I was across the room, dropping the cake plate without caring that it splattered on the floor. I grabbed Mia's hand, gently but firmly, pulling her into me. My voice shook with fury I could barely contain. "We're leaving." I didn't look at Chloe, not yet. I couldn't, because if I did, I didn't trust what I'd say. My entire focus was on shielding Mia, on getting her out of that room where whispers had already started bubbling up like poison. But as we walked toward the exit, I heard my mother's voice cut through the air behind me, sharp and cold. Mistake, child. It hit me harder than I expected, even after years of knowing where I stood in her eyes. I felt Mia flinch, and that was it. I didn't turn around, didn't defend myself, didn't argue. I just walked out, holding my daughter's hand so tightly I was afraid I'd hurt her. Outside, the night air was cold, but it felt like the first real breath I'd taken in hours. I crouched down to Mia's level, brushing the tears off her cheeks. "You're not pathetic," I told her. My throat tightened. "You're the best part of me. Don't ever forget that." She nodded, still sniffling, and buried her face in my chest. I drove home in silence, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. Every word replayed in my head. Chloe's mocking voice. My mom's cutting remark. The laughter I thought I heard behind us as we left. I told myself to let it go, to just protect Mia and move on. But there was a part of me, buried deep, that whispered, "Enough is enough." The next morning, I was still replaying it, still raw, when the doorbell rang. I opened it, and there was my mother. For the first time in my life, she looked small. Her hair was undone, her eyes red like she hadn't slept. She clasped her hands together as though in prayer. "Austin," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Please, don't ruin your sister's life." And that was the moment I realized something had shifted. They weren't worried about Mia. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about Chloe. About protecting the golden child from consequences. Something inside me snapped, but I stayed quiet. I just stood there, my daughter watching from behind me, and waited to hear what exactly my mother thought I could do that would ruin Chloe. Because if they thought last night was over, they had no idea what was coming. And that's where things started to unravel. When my mother showed up at my door that morning, her voice trembling, begging me not to ruin Chloe's life, I almost laughed. It wasn't the kind of laugh you let out when something is funny. It was bitter, quiet, and stuck in the back of my throat like I'd swallowed a stone. My daughter, Mia, peeked from behind my leg, clutching her stuffed rabbit to her chest, and I could feel her body stiffen just at the sound of my mom's voice. She remembered what had been said the night before. I could see it in her eyes. That was the part that broke me more than anything. The fact that my little girl had to carry that moment with her, the sting of being humiliated by her own aunt and dismissed by her grandmother. "Please, Austin," my mom said again, wringing her hands. "You don't understand. Chloe, she didn't mean it. She was just joking. If you say something to people, it'll destroy her reputation. She's got things lined up, her career, her volunteer work. You can't take that away from her." I just stared at her. I didn't respond. I wanted to ask, what about Mia's reputation? What about her feelings? But I knew the answer already. They had never prioritized me, and by extension, they would never prioritize my child. "Instead," I said softly, "I think you should go." Her lips tightened, but for once, she didn't argue. She gave me a look that was both pleading and resentful, like she couldn't decide if I was betraying her or if she was betraying me. Then she left, muttering under her breath about how I was being dramatic. That should have been the end of it, at least for a while. But the thing about people who thrive on favoritism and control is that they can't leave well enough alone. The following week was a storm, subtle at first, then crashing into something louder, nastier. It started with the family group chat. I usually muted it, but that week, I decided to look. Message after message poured in, all about Chloe. Pictures of her at some luncheon, my dad bragging about how she'd been featured in a local paper, and Aunt gushing about how proud the whole family was. Not one mention of the party, of what had happened. Not one acknowledgement that my daughter had been humiliated in front of dozens of relatives. I wanted to delete the chat entirely, but then I saw something that made my blood boil. My cousin, always the gossip, had typed, "I can't believe Austin made such a scene over that. Poor Chloe. He's always been so jealous." And my mom responded with a thumbs up. That was the narrative now. Not that Chloe had mocked my child. Not that my mom had called her a mistake. No, the story they were building was that I was jealous. That I had overreacted. That I was the problem. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. But inside, the anger burned hotter. Then the phone call started. My dad first. He had this way of talking that always made me feel like a child, no matter how old I was. "Austin," he sighed into the receiver. You've got to stop being so sensitive. You embarrassed Chloe. Do you know how that looks for her? She's worked so hard to build herself up, and you storm out like that? You made everyone uncomfortable. I gripped the phone tighter. Dad, she humiliated Mia. My daughter. Your granddaughter. Do you realize she cried herself to sleep that night? There was a pause. A long one. Then he said, kids are resilient. She'll get over it. But Chloe, her reputation is fragile. You've got to think of the bigger picture here. The bigger picture. That was always the excuse. I hung up without saying goodbye. It didn't stop there. Aunts, uncles, even cousins I barely spoke to called me, each with the same script. Chloe didn't mean it. You need to let it go. You're making too much out of nothing. One even said, Mia won't even remember this when she's older. But I would remember. And so would Mia. The final straw that week came on a Sunday afternoon. I had taken Mia to the park, just the two of us, trying to give her some normalcy. She was climbing the jungle gym when my phone buzzed with a message from Chloe herself. It was short, but it said everything about who she really was. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. If you can't handle being part of this family without ruining things, maybe you shouldn't come to events at all. My hands shook as I read it. I wanted to throw the phone against the ground, but Mia was watching, so I forced myself to pocket it and smile at her when she waved. That night, I sat awake long after Mia had gone to bed. My apartment was quiet, the hum of the fridge the only sound. I thought about the years of favoritism, the way every achievement of mine had been brushed aside, how every mistake Chloe made was excused. I thought about the way my mom had looked at me on the doorstep, more afraid for Chloe than ashamed for what she herself had said. And I thought about Mia, my sweet little girl, who didn't deserve to grow up thinking she was less than. The next week brought another test. Against my better judgment, I went to a small family dinner at my parents' house. I told myself it was just to keep the peace, to show Mia that we weren't completely cut off. I regret it now. The dinner was tense from the start. Chloe strutted around like nothing had happened, laughing loudly, making little jabs that were just subtle enough to pass off as jokes. Careful, Austin, she said at one point when I poured Mia a glass of water. Wouldn't want you to overreact if she spills it. The table chuckled, my mom included. My dad gave Chloe this proud, amused look, like she was clever for putting me in my place. Mia froze. She set the glass down slowly, looking like she wanted to shrink into her chair. I squeezed her shoulder and whispered, "It's okay." But I wasn't okay. Later, when dessert was brought out, Chloe leaned in close to Mia, her perfume strong, her smile sharp. "You know," she said sweetly, "you'd be a lot prettier if you didn't cry so much. But I guess you get that from your dad." I saw Mia's lips tremble. I couldn't stop myself this time. I slammed my fork down, the sound cutting through the room. Enough. The table went silent. All eyes turned to me. "She's a child," I said, my voice low but shaking with fury. "My child. And if you ever, speak to her like that again, I won't be quiet. Do you understand?" Chloe's smirk faltered for the first time. But before she could respond, my mom gasped theatrically. "Austin, how dare you speak to your sister that way?" She was only trying to help Mia toughen up. Toughen up. That's what they called it. Mocking. Belittling. Breaking her spirit. I stood, pulling Mia's chair back gently so she could stand too. "We're done here," I said, my voice louder this time. "Come on, sweetheart." As we walked to the door, I heard my dad mutter, "Drama. Always drama." And Chloe's laugh, faint but triumphant, followed us out like a curse. Back in the car, Mia leaned against me, whispering, "Daddy, why don't they like us?" I swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel until my hands hurt. "It's not that they don't like us," I said carefully. "It's that they don't understand us. And that's their loss, not ours." But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about misunderstanding. This was cruelty, dressed up as family loyalty. And I also knew something else. I couldn't let it continue. Not for Mia, not for myself. The pressure was building. Every comment, every manipulation, every false story they spun about me. It was all pushing me towards something I hadn't let myself consider before. That night, as I tucked Mia into bed and kissed her forehead, I sat awake again, staring at the ceiling. My mother's words echoed, "Don't ruin your sister's life." And for the first time, I wondered, what would happen if I did? I didn't think it could get worse than hearing my sister call my daughter pathetic and my mother labeling her a mistake child. But life has a way of proving you wrong when you least expect it. If part 2 was the slow drip of poison into a glass of water, part 3 was the moment someone tipped the whole glass over and watched me drown in it. It began, ironically enough, with an invitation. A few weeks after that miserable dinner, a cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. It was thick, embossed with gold edges, the kind of stationery my mother only reserved for important family events. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Inside was an invitation to Chloe's upcoming Celebration of Excellence banquet, a self-thrown gala for the award she had received, paid for by sponsors and donors she had charmed. My parents' names were listed on the invite as hosts. I almost tossed it in the trash. But Mia was nearby, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor coloring. She saw me holding it and asked softly, "Are we going, Daddy?" Her voice was cautious, like she was bracing for disappointment. I hesitated. Every part of me screamed no. But I hated the idea of her growing up believing we had to isolate ourselves. I didn't want her to think we were the outcasts, even if that's exactly how they treated us. So, against my better instincts, I told her, "Maybe. We'll see." In hindsight, that was my mistake. The weeks leading up to the banquet, the pressure increased. Calls from my parents urging me to show up and not cause another scene. A text from Chloe herself that read, "Don't embarrass me this time." I ignored most of it, but the weight of expectation gnawed at me. On the day of the banquet, Mia was so excited she picked out her dress herself, a pale blue one with little embroidered flowers. She twirled in front of the mirror, grinning, and for a moment, I let myself believe maybe, just maybe, things would be different this time. When we arrived at the banquet hall, everything looked extravagant. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, waiters in black uniforms weaving through the crowd with trays of champagne. Chloe stood at the center of it all, radiant in a sequined gown, basking in the attention. My parents hovered close by, proud and glowing as if they themselves had won the award. The first sign of trouble came when we walked in. Chloe's eyes flicked over to us, and I swear her smile faltered for half a second. Then she plastered it back on and breezed over, air kissing my cheek like nothing had ever happened. "Austin," she cooed. "So glad you could make it. And Mia, look at you, what a pretty little thing." The way she said it made my skin crawl. We sat at a table near the back, deliberately out of the spotlight. Mia was quiet, fiddling with her fork. I tried to reassure her, whispering, "We'll just eat, listen to the speeches, and go." She nodded, though her eyes darted nervously toward Chloe and my parents. The banquet dragged on with endless speeches and applause. I was tuning most of it out until I noticed Chloe whispering with one of her friends at the podium. They both glanced toward our table, and I felt my stomach twist. Then it happened. The MC, an older man in a suit, cleared his throat into the microphone. "Before we continue, Chloe has prepared a special presentation for us. A little family humor." My heart sank instantly. The lights dimmed, and a slideshow began on the projector screen. At first, it was innocent enough. Photos of Chloe as a child, Chloe winning a school spelling bee, Chloe at her graduation. But then, the tone shifted. A grainy picture of me, 14 years old, acne-covered, holding a science fair project. The caption underneath, "Second place, as usual." The crowd chuckled. Another picture, me in my 20s, asleep on a couch, mouth open, an unflattering angle clearly taken without my consent. Caption, "Still as lazy as ever." More laughter. And then, my breath caught in my throat, an image of Mia. Someone had taken a candid shot of her from the last family dinner, when she had been wiping her eyes after Chloe's cruel remark. The caption read, "Like father, like daughter." The laughter this time wasn't as loud, more scattered, but it was there. It was enough. I felt my chest tighten, my pulse roar in my ears. I looked at Mia. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide and glassy. She looked at me, silently begging for reassurance, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know what to say. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. The sound cut through the murmurs in the room. Chloe, standing near the projector, smirked. "Oh, come on, Austin," she said into the microphone, her voice dripping with faux innocence. "It's just a joke. Don't be so sensitive. Everyone knows you've always been the serious one." The crowd chuckled again, but it was nervous this time. People shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. I took Mia's hand, her small fingers trembling in mine. "We're leaving," I said, my voice low but sharp enough to carry. But before I could take another step, My mother's voice rang out from the front. Austin, stop being dramatic. Sit down and let your sister have her moment. Don't ruin this for her. The words echoed in the hall. For a second, I thought I might collapse from the sheer weight of it. In that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't just anger. It was betrayal so deep it felt like I'd been cut open from the inside. My own family had not only mocked me, they had dragged my child into their cruelty. They had put her picture on a screen for strangers to laugh at. And my mother, had defended it. I turned to look at her, and I'll never forget the expression on her face. Cold, stern, a silent warning that if I spoke out, I'd be the villain again. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just walked out, holding Mia's hand tightly in mine, my head pounding with every step. Behind me, I could still hear Chloe laughing into the microphone, brushing it all off like it was harmless. When we got to the car, Mia broke. She sobbed into her hands, her small shoulders shaking. Why are they so mean, Daddy? Why do they hate us? I wrapped my arms around her, holding her so tightly I was afraid I'd hurt her. They don't hate you, I whispered, though the words tasted like lies. They don't understand. But I promise you, Mia, I'll never let them do this to you again. And I meant it. Something had shifted that night. The betrayal was too deep, the wound too raw. There was no going back to pretending this was just normal family favoritism. They had crossed a line, and I knew, deep in my bones, that something had to change. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know when. But as I sat there in the car, holding my daughter while the laughter from the banquet echoed faintly in the distance, I felt something new stirring in me. Not just anger, not just hurt, resolve. And that's when the real story began. After the banquet, after the slideshow, after watching my daughter's face crumble in front of an entire room of people who thought her pain was something to laugh at, I didn't just leave the event. I left something bigger behind. For a few days, it felt like I was walking through fog. Everything was heavy, my body, my mind, even the air around me. I went to work. I took care of Mia, but every quiet moment my thoughts spiraled back to that screen, to the photograph of her wiping her eyes with a caption meant to humiliate both of us. I replayed the sound of my mother's voice, sharp and cold, telling me to stop being dramatic, telling me to sit down and let Chloe have her moment. I kept hearing Chloe's laugh at the microphone, smug, like she had pulled off the performance of the year. At night, I would lie awake long after Mia fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, my chest tight. I'd always known my family favored Chloe, but there's a difference between favoritism and outright cruelty. There's a difference between looking the other way and putting a child, my child, on display for strangers to mock. That was the line. That was the moment everything broke. But here's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just sting once. It echoes. The following week, the family group chat lit up again. Screenshots, photos, compliments about the banquet, endless congratulations directed at Chloe. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. And then I saw it. Someone had posted a photo from the slideshow itself. The picture of Mia, caption included, smiling emojis scattered around like it was the funniest thing in the world. My aunt even typed, "So true though, haha." I think that was the first time in my life I felt something close to hatred for my family. I didn't reply. I didn't say a word. But I saved that photo. I saved every message. A quiet part of me was beginning to collect things, like seeds I didn't yet know what to plant. Mia was quieter too. She stopped asking about family events, stopped talking about her grandparents or her aunt. When I picked her up from school, she'd clutch my hand tighter than usual, her little face set in silence. One evening, I found her in her room staring at the dress she wore to the banquet, folded neatly on her chair. She asked, "Daddy, can I throw it away?" I knelt down and brushed her hair back from her face. "If you want to," I said gently. "You don't have to keep anything that makes you feel bad." She nodded and stuffed the dress into a bag. That was the moment I realized she was already learning to distance herself. And while part of me was proud of her strength, another part broke all over again. A 7-year-old shouldn't have to make choices like that. Meanwhile, the calls from my parents didn't stop. They left voicemails dripping with irritation. "You embarrassed us again. You're blowing this out of proportion. Don't punish Chloe for being successful." My dad, in his usual flat tone, said, "You're isolating yourself, Austin. Families stick together. Stop making this harder than it needs to be. Families stick together. Unless, of course, you're the one they decided doesn't count." The worst came one afternoon when I went to pick Mia up from school. Another parent, someone I barely knew, gave me a strange look as we waited outside the building. Finally, she said, "I saw you at the banquet." That slideshow was something. Her voice had that forced brightness people use when they're uncomfortable. Kids are tough though, right? I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her my daughter wasn't a punchline. Instead, I just gave a stiff nod and muttered, "She'll be fine." But inside, something hardened. Chloe hadn't just humiliated us privately. She had planted a public narrative. Now strangers associated Mia with that cruelty. And my family thought it was acceptable. That was my rock bottom. Not the banquet itself, not even my mother's betrayal, but the realization that their actions followed us outside those walls. It wasn't confined to family anymore. It was spilling into the world Mia had to grow up in. So I pulled back. Completely. I stopped answering phone calls. I muted the family chat for good. I blocked Chloe's number after she sent another message complaining that I was making her look bad by sulking. When my parents showed up at my apartment unannounced, I didn't answer the door. For the first time in my life, I started drawing real lines. But I didn't stop there. During those long nights when I couldn't sleep, I started thinking differently. It wasn't enough to walk away. It wasn't enough to shield Mia. Because as long as my family believed they were untouchable, as long as they thought they could twist reality to make me the villain, they would never stop. They would always find a way to circle back, to drag us into their games. So, I began observing. Quietly, patiently. I started paying attention to the way Chloe presented herself online. She lived for appearances. Her social media was full of carefully curated posts about her volunteer work, her awards, her speeches. She branded herself as this shining example of grace and generosity. People outside the family thought she was practically a saint. That image was her entire identity. And yet, behind the scenes, I had screenshots, videos, words she would never want the public to hear. I had proof of her cruelty, proof of my parents' complicity. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was enough to remind me that I wasn't powerless. I also started looking inward. For too long, I had lived in their shadow, letting them dictate the narrative. But Mia needed more from me. She needed me to be strong enough not only to protect her, but to show her that you don't let people walk all over you, not even family. I didn't tell her any of my thoughts, of course. To her, I kept things light. I focused on making her life as normal and safe as possible, playdates, homework, bedtime stories. But when she was asleep, I planned. It was subtle at first. I started setting aside every message, every insult, every photo that surfaced. I reached out quietly to a cousin I trusted, one who had always kept their distance from the family drama, and asked a few careful questions. I learned things, small cracks in the shiny image Chloe projected, things others had noticed but dismissed. Each piece felt like adding another stone to a foundation. I didn't know yet what I was building, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't stay at rock bottom forever. There was a night, about 3 weeks after the banquet, when I sat on the balcony after Mia had gone to bed. The city was quiet, the air cool. I held my phone in my hand, staring at the saved photo of the slideshow, the one of Mia with the cruel caption. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to look at it, to really see it. And then I whispered, out loud, to the night air, "Never again." That was my promise to her. That was my promise to myself. It wasn't the kind of cinematic moment where everything suddenly clicks into place. It was quieter than that, steadier. But it was the beginning of something new. I had reached the bottom, yes. But from there, the only way left was up. And though I didn't have the full plan yet, I knew this. Chloe had gone too far. My parents had gone too far. They thought they could humiliate us, dismiss us, twist the story in their favor. They thought I would stay silent forever. They were wrong. And soon enough, they would learn just how wrong. After the banquet fiasco and the weeks of silence that followed, something in me shifted permanently. Rock bottom had left me raw, but it also gave me clarity I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I realized my life didn't have to orbit around their approval, their narrative, or their constant dismissal. I could walk away, and more than that, I could build something stronger, something they couldn't touch. It didn't happen overnight. It was small at first, almost invisible changes that only Mia and I noticed. For one, I threw myself into work. I'm a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm, and for years I had kept my head down, doing my job without drawing too much attention. But after everything with my family, I stopped shrinking myself. I started speaking up more in meetings, taking the lead on proposals, pushing ideas forward. To my surprise, people listened. Within a few months, I was leading a major development project, a multi-million-dollar contract that brought a lot of visibility. That visibility came with recognition. My boss, who had always been polite but distant, began calling me into his office not just to assign work, but to ask my opinion. One afternoon, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Austin, you've been here long enough. You've proven yourself. I'm going to put you in charge of the downtown redevelopment project. It's big. It's high pressure, but I think you're the guy for it." Walking out of that office, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of worth that didn't rely on anyone else's approval. It wasn't about proving my parents wrong or competing with Chloe. It was about proving to myself that I wasn't the failure they always made me out to be. Mia noticed the changes too. She started drawing little pictures of me in her sketchbook, stick figure daddy, in a hard hat, smiling with his arms wide. One evening, she showed me a drawing of our apartment building with the words, "Our home," written above it in uneven letters. I hugged her so tight she squealed. At home, things improved in quieter ways. I redecorated Mia's room with her, letting her pick out new posters, fairy lights, and a rug shaped like a star. We painted one wall a bright yellow together, both of us covered in splatters of paint by the end. She giggled through the whole process, and when we were done, she looked around proudly and said, "Now it feels like me." That mattered more than anything. But it wasn't just personal. Financially, things started looking up too. With the promotion and the extra responsibilities, my salary increased. I finally felt like I could breathe a little, not counting every dollar the way I used to. I set up a savings account specifically for Mia's future. Every time I transferred money into it, I felt a strange combination of pride and defiance. Pride that I could provide for her on my own, and defiance that she would never need to depend on the people who hurt her. Still, even as things improved, I didn't forget what had happened. That resolve I'd whispered on the balcony, "Never again," was etched into everything I did. Quietly, I kept collecting. Every voicemail, every message, every shred of evidence that revealed who Chloe and my parents really were behind closed doors. Not out of obsession, but out of preparation. It was during this time of growth that an opportunity practically fell into my lap. One of the contractors I worked with, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sandra, became a sort of mentor to me. She saw how hard I worked and how much I cared about doing things right. Over coffee one day, she said, "Austin, have you ever considered branching out? Starting your own firm? You've got the skills. You've got the people who'd follow you." The idea floored me at first. Me? Start my own company? For so long, I had internalized the idea that I was the pathetic one, the background sibling, the one who never measured up. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I had the experience. I had the connections. And most importantly, I had the drive. For weeks, I researched, planned, and met with contacts discreetly. At night, after Mia went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table drafting ideas, running numbers, mapping out what it would take. Every page I filled, every call I made, felt like laying another brick in a foundation no one could knock down. And here's the thing, people believed in me, far more than I expected. A few colleagues I trusted quietly told me, "If you go for it, we'll back you." One even said, "You're the reason I've stayed at this firm. If you start something, I'll follow you there." It was empowering. It was terrifying. But it was also the first time I truly felt in control of my future. Meanwhile, Mia was blossoming. She joined an art club at school, something she never would have dared to do before. She made a new friend, a bubbly girl named Lily, and the two of them were inseparable. I'd hear them giggling in her room, whispering secrets, their laughter spilling down the hall like music. Seeing her happy, seeing her rebuild her confidence after everything she'd endured, was worth more than any promotion or paycheck. But even as life improved, the family pressure didn't disappear. If anything, it intensified. My parents kept trying to lure me back in. Calls about family dinners I ignored, texts about important announcements that turned out to be more celebrations for Chloe. They sent photos of themselves at her events, smiling and glowing like the perfect family. It was like they wanted to remind me what I was missing, as if that would pull me back into their orbit. And then came the kicker. One Saturday morning, as Mia and I were making pancakes, I got an email. It was from a local business magazine. The subject line read, Feature interview opportunity. My heart raced as I read through it. They wanted to interview me for my work on the downtown redevelopment project to highlight the impact it was having on the community. Me, not Chloe, not my parents. Me. When the article came out, with my photo and quotes about leadership and community, I almost cried. Not because of the recognition itself, but because of what it symbolized. For once, the spotlight wasn't theirs to twist. It was mine, earned by my own hands. The fallout was immediate. I didn't hear from my parents directly, but one of my cousins texted me. "Wow, the article is great. Congrats. But brace yourself, Chloe is furious. She thinks you're trying to steal her thunder." I laughed out loud for the first time in weeks. Steal her thunder? I hadn't even thought about her. But that was the problem, wasn't it? In her mind, everything revolved around her. And now, for the first time, it didn't. That's when I knew the tide had turned. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rising. And yet, even as I built this new life, even as success grew and power shifted, I never forgot the promise I made. I wasn't out for revenge just yet, but I was building the tools. The stronger I became, the clearer it became that when the time came, I wouldn't just defend myself and Mia. I'd expose the truth. And when that day arrived, Chloe and my parents would finally understand what it meant to underestimate me. By the time my feature article came out, the balance in my life had shifted in ways I hadn't even dared to dream a year earlier. I wasn't just recovering anymore. I was building. I had gone from the shadowed sun in the background to someone whose name was being printed in magazines, mentioned in industry meetings, and whispered about by colleagues with respect. Mia was thriving. I was thriving. And yet, in the quiet hours of the night, when everything was still, I knew the story wasn't finished. Because the truth is, no matter how high you climb, unresolved betrayal clings to you like smoke. And my family's betrayal, what they did to Mia, still hung in the air, unburned and unforgotten. The setup for what came next wasn't one big dramatic discovery. It was gradual, a slow accumulation of opportunities and bits of information, like puzzle pieces falling into place until I realized I was sitting on the kind of leverage Chloe and my parents never thought I could have. It started innocuously. One afternoon at work, Sandra, the contractor who had been urging me to branch out, introduced me to a city councilman over lunch. We talked about the redevelopment project, about timelines, about how the firm was handling community feedback. Then, casually, the councilman asked me, "Do you happen to know Chloe Miller? She reached out recently about some community partnership funding." I almost laughed into my water. Of course she had. Chloe never missed an opportunity to brand herself as the charitable golden child. I kept my tone neutral. "Yes, she's my sister." The councilman nodded, lowering his voice slightly. "Interesting. Off the record, she seems polished, but something about her proposal felt off. Very self-promotional, light on actual community benefit." He shrugged. "We'll see where it goes." I nodded politely, but inside, something sparked. Because what he didn't know, and what I did, was that Chloe's entire community service portfolio was built on shaky ground. I had seen her cut corners, exaggerate donations, take credit for other people's work. And suddenly I realized, if she was taking that same approach to city-level funding, she wasn't just being entitled. She was crossing into territory that could ruin her if the right people found out. That night, after Mia went to bed, I pulled out the folder I had been quietly building for months. Screenshots of the cruel messages, recordings of my parents' voicemails, the photo from the slideshow. But now I started a new section, Chloe's facade. I combed through her social media, her newsletters, even the event programs my parents proudly mailed me. I noticed patterns, numbers that didn't add up, claims about hours volunteered that clashed with dates she had been traveling, photos from charity events where, with a little digging, I found out she'd shown up only for the opening ceremony, then left before the actual work began. Individually, none of it was damning, but collectively, it painted a picture. And then, by sheer coincidence, another piece fell into my lap. A colleague at the firm, someone who handled vendor contracts, called me into his office. "Hey Austin, small thing. I was reviewing some invoices for catering services tied to the redevelopment project's fundraising gala. Guess whose name popped up?" I frowned. "Who?" He slid the paper toward me. Chloe's name. She had submitted catering invoices through a community initiative she ran. Except, Chloe didn't run a catering business. She barely knew how to boil water. I stared at the paper, my pulse quickening. Are you sure this is legitimate? The colleague shrugged. That's the thing. It looks padded, overpriced. Probably nothing, but it raised a flag. He leaned in. Between us, if someone's trying to slip personal gain into a public project, that's a big deal. The city won't like it. I walked out of that office with my mind racing. Because if Chloe was funneling money through fake invoices, even just once, she was leaving a paper trail. And paper trails had a way of catching fire when exposed. For the next few weeks, I dug deeper. Not recklessly, but methodically. I requested public records on a few of the nonprofits Chloe claimed to lead. Most were real on paper, but their filings were suspiciously thin, annual reports missing, financials vague. It wasn't hard to see the pattern. Chloe had built a glittering image out of half-truths and illusions. And my parents had propped it up, never questioning, always clapping from the front row. The more I uncovered, the calmer I felt. Because this wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge anymore. It was about truth. About protecting Mia from growing up under the shadow of people who thought cruelty was a joke and image was everything. At the same time, my own position was solidifying. The whispers about me starting my own firm had grown louder, and one evening Sandra pulled me aside after a meeting. Austin, I've been talking with a few investors. They're interested in backing you if you're serious about branching out. You've got the track record now. You're not just a manager anymore. You're a leader. I nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. A leader. And I realized, I wasn't just collecting leverage against Chloe. I was building independence, freedom, power. The kind of power they could never take away because it wasn't built on their approval. It was built on my work, my choices, my integrity. Still, the family didn't let up. My mother left another voicemail one evening, her tone tight and clipped. Austin, you've made your point. Stop isolating yourself. Chloe's nomination for State Volunteer of the Year is coming up, and we don't need you sulking and ruining things. Be there for your family for once. For once. The irony nearly made me laugh. But instead of deleting the message, I saved it. Because every word they spoke, every demand they made, only added fuel to the fire I was quietly stoking. The turning point came when I bumped into one of Chloe's old classmates at a networking event. He was a lawyer now, working in compliance. Over drinks, he casually mentioned, "Funny thing, I once helped Chloe set up one of her foundations back in the day. I told her she needed to keep her books airtight. Honestly, I doubt she listened." He laughed. She always cared more about the photo ops. I pressed lightly, asking a few more questions, careful not to reveal too much. By the end of the conversation, I had a name of someone who had worked on Chloe's filings before. Someone I could, if I wanted, discreetly contact. Driving home that night, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Because I finally saw the shape of things. I wasn't just the black sheep anymore. I wasn't the scapegoat or the background character. I had the pieces, the network, the strength. And I had something Chloe and my parents didn't. Patience. They had built their lives on quick wins, shiny surfaces, and cutting others down. I was building something slower, stronger, lasting. And when the time came, when everything lined up just right, they would discover that the pathetic one they dismissed had become the person holding all the cards. That night, after tucking Mia into bed, I stood again on the balcony. The city lights flickered below, steady and unbothered. I thought about my mother's words, "Don't ruin your sister's life," and felt a bitter smile tug at my lips. Because the truth was, Chloe was already ruining her own life with every lie, every false invoice, every shallow performance. All I had to do was decide when to stop shielding her from the consequences. And when that day came, it wouldn't just be satisfying. It would be inevitable. When I finally decided to stop waiting and start acting, it didn't feel dramatic or cinematic. There were no secret meetings at midnight or movie-style reveals with thunder cracking in the background. It was paperwork, coffee, phone calls, and long evenings piecing things together until the pattern was so obvious even someone scrolling past a headline couldn't miss it. The difference between what I was doing now and the way I'd handled things in the past was that this time I wasn't reacting. I was orchestrating. Calmly. Precisely. For Mia. First, I tightened the web of facts. The padded catering invoices weren't a single mistake. They were a thread. I reached out to the compliance lawyer I'd met at the networking event and asked him, quietly, if he'd glance at a few documents and tell me whether they were normal. I told him I wasn't looking for trouble. I just wanted to know if something smelled off. He read through 2 of Chloe's filings and, without dramatics, said, "There's room here to ask some questions." That was the language of someone who knew how to start a chain reaction without looking like the one who started it. Next, Sandra connected me with an independent accountant she trusted. I paid him out of my own savings. No dramatics, just a bank transfer and a terse message. Find out whether numbers add up. He was meticulous in a way that made me comfortable. 2 weeks later, he called and gave me the kind of confirmation that loosens your stomach and steals your resolve at the same time. Invoices that matched vendors who had no clear relationship to Chloe's charity. Invoices that were duplicated across multiple events, and a suspiciously high rate charge to supposedly volunteer-run programs. Not one smoking gun, yet, but a very strong case for auditors to look further. I assembled everything into folders. Not as revenge porn, not as angry evidence, as accountability. Photos from the banquet, that hideous slideshow screen grab with Mia's face, Chloe's outgoing messages demanding I stop, embarrassing her. The invoices, the thin nonprofit filings, my mother's voicemail telling me to stop ruining things. I made copies, labeled them, and organized them so that anyone with authority could follow the thread without guessing. Then I started placing the pieces where they needed to be. The first target was local government. The padded invoices were tied to a small public grant program that Chloe had been angling for, money that was supposed to pay for after-school tutoring at community centers. I sent an anonymous tip to the councilman who'd mentioned her to me before, attaching a redacted sample of the invoices and a short summary. Possible misuse of grant funds. Request for audit. I didn't want drama. I wanted auditors. I wanted someone neutral to lift the rug and see what was under it. I also contacted the journalist who'd covered urban development projects. She'd interviewed me after the magazine piece. I kept my message simple and professional. A request for background checks on a few local nonprofit claims and some invoices that didn't add up. I didn't go for rage or melodrama. Reporters are good at turning facts into narrative. I gave her facts. Within days, she called, curious and cautious. She asked for documents. I gave them. She promised discretion and said she'd verify independently. Part of the strategy was timing. I could have dropped everything at once, but that risks looking like a personal vendetta. If you want to topple a facade built on community goodwill, you let the systems designed to protect the public do their work. Auditors, journalists, regulators. Then you let the truth emerge in forms people trust. People like proof, and they trust institutions. Meanwhile, I kept building my own life so I wouldn't look petty when the time came. My fledgling firm was becoming real. Sandra introduced me to 2 investors who offered seed money with a handshake and an in-meeting nod that said they'd actually do it. Within a month, I had an office lease, 3 reliable subcontractors, and 2 committed colleagues from my old firm ready to jump ship. The public profile I'd slowly built mattered now. I had credibility, which bought me a kind of armor. When people who knew Chloe only as a smiling slideshow saw both the other side and that I wasn't some embittered brother trying to sabotage, it made the story harder to dismiss. I didn't miss the personal symmetries, either. Chloe always loved ceremonies. Events where light caught the sequins on her dress, and people clapped and handed her flowers. She built her life around applause. So I started making sure the places where she expected applause were places where scrutiny could be applied. I registered complaints with the Charity Commission about incomplete annual reports. I filed a Freedom of Information request for procurement details tied to her program proposals. Those moves were bureaucratic, dull, and effective. They also bought me time. While the wheels turned, the journalists' questions started to land at the right offices. The pressure felt like a slow, inevitable tightening rather than an earthquake. Emails arrived at the nonprofit's listed address asking for clarification about donations and expenditures. A grant officer asked Chloe for backup receipts for an event she'd claimed thousands for. Chloe's PR team, yes, she had one, sent me a passive-aggressive text one evening. "You seem very busy. Hope you're not stirring trouble." I saved every message. There was also the human side of it. I reached out to a cousin who'd always seemed uncomfortable with the family dynamics. He'd been complicit by silence for years, but then he sent me a message that surprised me. "I'm tired of pretending." He started sharing things he'd seen. An old email where Chloe credited only herself for a volunteer drive, but thanked 3 of his friends in private for doing the real work. He gave me names of people who had been paid consulting fees for tiny administrative tasks that the invoices suggested were a full-time catering operation. I repaid him with photos of Mia and a simple, "We'll fix this quietly," for her. As the pressure translated into formal scrutiny, Chloe's behavior shifted in real time. At first, she was coquettish on social media, posting carefully curated smiling photos and captions about gratitude. Then she got defensive, terser posts, thinly veiled digs about people who spread rumors. A private influencer friend advised her to do a get-ahead interview, tell her story before anyone else could. She booked a local morning show slot, the kind that paints civic leaders in soft light. That morning show appearance could have been the perfect stage for her to deflect, if not for the journalist who'd been poking around. She dug into the invoices and found overlapping dates and businesses that, when called, said they had no contract with Chloe's nonprofit. The reporter had lined up testimony from one of the catering vendors who flatly denied ever billing Chloe's organization. She also had a draft of the audit request that the council would open that week. She called to say she was ready to run if I gave the final nod. This was the moment that felt like the end of a long inhale. Everything I'd collected, every quiet phone call, every legal question, every saved voice message from my mother insisting I stop ruining things, it all converged into a single, obvious truth. Chloe had curated her life as performance, and her performance had been bankrolled by other people's goodwill and, in some cases, misappropriated funds. I could have gone to my parents at that point. I fantasized about the confrontation, sober, cutting, with facts laid out like surgical instruments. But I knew them. Confrontation would let them spin it into martyrdom again. Instead, I kept moving through the proper channels. Anonymous tip that led to an audit desk review. A reporter who verified claims and prepared a piece with corroboration from multiple sources, and a council request that could freeze funding pending investigation. The day the reporter said she was going live, Chloe texted me a single line. "If you publish lies, I will make sure everyone knows who you really are." She attached a screenshot of one of my older, less flattering social posts. Old jokes taken out of context, the perfect smudge to smear me with. I felt a familiar old panic for a second, and then something steadier replaced it. I replied calmly, "Facts are louder than insults." I walked Mia to school that morning and watched her wave at the other kids. She had no idea what was about to happen. She had no idea of audits or invoices or journalists. She only knew life with me. Pancakes, story time, tucking her in. I wanted to keep it that way. That was always the line I swore I wouldn't cross, dragging her into the fight. Which is why I'd built everything so carefully. The wheels I'd set in motion would expose Chloe's choices. They would not put Mia back on a screen to be mocked. The reporter posted the story mid-afternoon. It was clear and neutral and merciless in the way facts can be. It laid out a timeline, included statements from a vendor denying the invoices, showed discrepancies in nonprofit filings, and quoted a grant officer raising concerns about the documentation Chloe had submitted. It also, discreetly and respectfully, mentioned the amateurish slideshow incident, linking to the publicly available photo and noting how family dynamics can complicate nonprofit work. Within hours, the Charity Commission acknowledged receipt of the journalist's inquiry. The council placed a temporary hold on the grant review. A major sponsor withdrew their pledge pending clarification. Chloe's comments on social media swung from defensive to frantic. My parents called, then texted, then left voicemails filled with a kind of desperate, wounded anger that sounded almost like panic. "This will ruin her," my mother said into the phone, voice cracking. "You don't understand what this will do." I saved that message. I logged every call. I didn't want to be cruel. I wanted accountability. What I hadn't expected was how quickly civilians would start to change their tone. Neighbors I'd barely known began to send messages, some supportive, some shocked, some asking for more details. People who had once nodded and laughed at Chloe's jokes now avoided her posts. The dynamic that had insulated her for years, an orbit of applause built on unexamined assumptions, started to wobble. And yet, even as the formal mechanisms began to bite, the most satisfying part wasn't the headlines. It was the quiet, private moments I kept having, the ones that let me know I'd done the right thing. My cousin sent a text, "Thank you." The independent accountant message that he'd been glad to help. The vendor who denied billing Chloe called to say he'd been offering services pro bono and felt sick at the invoice that bore his name. Those small confirmations mattered more than 1,000 public comments. By late afternoon, Chloe's phone lit up with frantic calls she didn't answer. She posted a long statement about misunderstandings and attacks, and my mother posted a pleading, public apology that read as though someone had written it for her. In the comments, the tone shifted. People asking for receipts, people who donated asking for clarity. The world was suddenly interested in the bookkeeping. And then, just when I thought the machine was running as it should, I saw Chloe's plan reframe. She wasn't rapping. She was gearing up. There was a private live stream, an appeal, a plea for sympathy, a thread where she began to paint herself as the victim of a bitter sibling desperate for attention. The script was predictable. Emphasize family, highlight the good she'd done, accuse me of jealousy. She prattled on about sabotage and bullying. It was all projection, but it had traction for people who wanted a simpler narrative. I knew then that facts alone weren't always enough to change everyone's mind. People love tidy stories, heroes and villains with clear edges. My family had made a whole career of telling the tidy story that benefited them. I had to be patient until the facts made that tidy story indefensible. The auditors would take their time. The Charity Commission would issue findings on its own schedule. The council would do what councils do, deliberate and drag things out. But the truth was being sown in places that mattered. That evening, as the sun dipped and the city moved to its softer light, I sat at my kitchen table with the last piece of the plan open on my laptop. The biggest move was still ahead of me. Not vindictive, not cruel, but decisive. I had one final document that, once submitted to the right hands and the right media with corroborating statements, would make it nearly impossible for Chloe to reframe everything as a smear campaign. It would be the audit request with attached vendor denials, the nonprofit filings with red flags highlighted, the chain of messages showing my mother's insistence that I not ruin things while celebrating Chloe's rise. It would be the full, unspooled version of what I'd built quietly over months. My finger hovered over the send button. For a second, panic knotted my throat. This would not just publicly jolt Chloe. It would shake the family foundation to its core. It would force them all, my mother, my father, Chloe, to reckon with the reality they'd spent years refusing to see. I closed my eyes and thought of Mia, asleep upstairs, hair splayed on her pillow like a small halo. I thought of how she'd stared at the slideshow and how she'd asked me, with such blunt, honest pain, why they were mean. I thought of the nights I'd promised myself I would protect her in a way that lasted, not a protection that merely temporarily shielded her from ridicule. I exhaled, opened my eyes, and the cursor blinked at me on a white screen, patient and impartial. The send button waited. I imagined what would happen in the next hour, the next day. Flurries of activity, statements, calls, denials, people clutching at their reputations. I imagined Chloe's face when the audit notice went public. I imagined my mother's voicemail again, but this time the world would be listening. And then I paused, because even with everything in place, I understood that once you start a process that breaks a certain kind of armor, there's no going back. The consequences would ripple in places I hadn't measured. The family dinners that would be impossible, the relatives who would pick sides, the small joys that might be lost in the fallout. My finger trembled above the trackpad. I thought about patience, about timing, about the difference between being vindictive and being just. I thought about how I wanted Mia to learn what strength looked like, firm, principled, and responsible. I moved the cursor to the send button and stopped. The screen's glow reflected in my tea mug. Outside, the city hummed along, indifferent. I breathed in, breathed out. The morning after I pressed send, the world felt different, quieter in one sense, but vibrating with a kind of hidden energy, like the air before a storm. By mid-morning, the audit notice was public, the journalist's follow-up had gone live, and Chloe's carefully crafted persona was unraveling. The headlines weren't lurid or sensational. They were clinical, factual, the kind of language that stings more because it doesn't exaggerate. Local nonprofit leader faces questions over misused funds. Audit to review financial practices of Chloe Miller's foundations. The words faces questions and audit were enough to make sponsors step back, donors retreat, and opportunists quietly delete their supportive comments on her social media pages. The fallout began immediately. That morning, I got a call from my cousin, the same one who had slipped me those quiet bits of information before. His voice was low, rushed. "Austin, it's chaos. Your mom's been on the phone all morning, crying to anyone who will pick up. Your dad's furious, says you've destroyed the family. And Chloe, she hasn't left her apartment. She's panicking." I thanked him, hung up, and sat there at the kitchen table with my coffee cooling beside me. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt was steadier, deeper. Not glee, not spite, closure. By afternoon, my phone buzzed with calls I didn't answer. First my mother, then my father, then Chloe, over and over, leaving voicemails filled with rage and desperation. One of them I did listen to, just once, because I wanted to hear the shift. It was my mother's voice, sharp with panic. "Austin, you've gone too far this time. Do you understand what you've done? Chloe could lose everything. You'll regret this." Her voice cracked mid-sentence. "She's your sister. Families protect each other. Why couldn't you just stay quiet?" Stay quiet. That had always been the expectation. And that was why this moment mattered. Within days, the ripple effects spread wider. The grant Chloe had angled for was frozen pending the audit. A major donor publicly announced they were reviewing their commitment. Her PR team dropped her after the journalist's second article connected discrepancies between her nonprofit filings and her self-promotional claims. For years, Chloe had been the untouchable golden child, the one my parents paraded around. Now, she was answering her phone with the flat, rehearsed tone of someone trying to do damage control. But the thing about facades is once they crack, people stop seeing the shine. They only see the fracture. And my parents? They tried to spin it at first. I heard through cousins that my father had told relatives this was all political, that enemies were trying to drag Chloe down because she was too successful. But when the auditors released a preliminary finding, flagging multiple serious concerns in her nonprofit's bookkeeping, the relatives who had laughed along at Chloe's jokes fell silent. One by one, the family chat dried up. The applause was gone. I didn't need to confront them. The truth was doing the work for me. The most powerful moment came not from headlines or voicemails, but from something quieter. One evening, Mia came home from school, set her backpack down, and said, "Daddy, someone's mom told me she saw you in a magazine again. She said you helped build the city." She smiled when she said it. I knelt down, brushing her hair back from her face. "That's right, sweetheart." Her eyes shone, steady. "So we're not pathetic." I swallowed hard. "No, baby. We never were." That was it. That was the line I'd been waiting for, the line that meant everything. Not my parents' approval, not Chloe's reputation, not the noise of relatives choosing sides. It was my daughter knowing she was safe, knowing that the story her aunt and grandmother tried to pin on us was a lie, broken and exposed. Weeks later, when the final audit report came out, it confirmed what I already knew. Chloe had padded invoices, misrepresented donations, and used nonprofit funds for personal events. It wasn't criminal, at least not enough for prosecution, but it was enough to permanently tarnish her credibility. She lost her grants. She lost her donors. She lost the public platform she had built her identity on. My parents, once so loud and proud, went silent. Invitations stopped coming. Their voices stopped filling my voicemail. The family chat became a hollow echo of old times, with fewer people talking, fewer photos shared. Without Chloe as the shining centerpiece, there was nothing left to orbit around. And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I didn't need to. I poured my energy into Mia, into my growing firm, into the life we were building together. One night, months after the dust had settled, I stood on the balcony again, looking out at the city lights. I thought about all the years I'd been told to stay quiet, to be grateful, to endure. I thought about the banquet, the slideshow, the photo of my daughter with that cruel caption. And I thought about how far we'd come since then. For the first time in years, I felt light. Free. I whispered to the night, almost to myself, never again. And this time, it wasn't a promise. It was the truth.